happy to share in any way that I can, and hopefully put some information out that's worth listening to.
Absolutely. There's going to be a ton of people that are going to see a lot of value in this. So I guess we just start with where does this all start for you? This whole pole vaulting thing, this athletic journey, where are you from, things like that.
Got it. Well, I claim Spokane, Washington as my home, and I moved there in 5th grade. But before then, I was actually born in South Dakota, and I moved from South Dakota to Pennsylvania to Ohio to New York and then to Spokane, all before 5th grade. So Dad worked for General Motors. He got transferred a lot. And so it was a situation where I've always kind of felt like a bit of a vagabond. Like I've never really had, that home crowd, so to speak. And so I started sport really in Ohio. And my dad was in martial arts. And so I started some karate when I was super young, and it was kind of fun. I ended up winning the Ohio State karate title for my age group back in, I moved out of New York, I think in 3rd grade, but I think I started sometime around kindergarten, 1st grade. So we're not talking about high-end karate, but it was kind of my first dabble in sports, and I was able to have some success there. And then when I moved to New York, from 3rd through 5th grade, and that's where I started Vince Lombardi tackle football. And so those were my kind of 2 youngest sporting memories, were those 2 sports. And then when I moved to Spokane, is when football and track kind of began for me.
Gotcha. So in Spokane is whenever you started track. So now, did you just jump right into pole vaulting, or were you, I see a lot of football players just initially go into like the sprints and relays and stuff like that. So did you jump into pole vaulting first, or how did you get involved with the vault?
I was actually, my older sister was a high jumper, and I thought it looked really fun. So in 7th grade is when track and field started in middle school for us. And I just wanted to do the high jump. And then our track coach was our band coach, and he didn't know much about track. He probably didn't know much about band either, but we won't get into that. But anyway, he at one point he just called everybody over and said, "Hey, we need a couple of pole vaulters. Would any of you guys like to try?" And so a handful of us raised our hands, and he didn't know what he was looking for and didn't really have much instruction for us, but he chose me and a couple other kids, and that was the beginning. It was just I already kind of like clearing the bar on the high jump, and this one seemed a little bit more fun, so that was the start.
Right. And it's that is the start for so many American pole vaulters. And it seems so different from the little bit that I know about, overseas. You kind of, have these different avenues that are set up better for maybe teaching the pole vault in the proper way and things like that. It seems like that's a common theme in America and in high school, is it's just like, hey, you want to pole vault? Let's pole vault, and it's like, we got 3 poles, we got a pit, and we'll see what you can do, So is that kind of how it was? I mean, how do you go from, hey, you think you want to pole vault, to you're a very accomplished high school pole vaulter?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think the tides are changing. I don't think a lot of kids start in that same manner because of the club scene now. And obviously, if you're running a club, you have some pretty good level of coaching ability to even have the initiative or want to start your own club. So I think it's changing, but I think back in the day, it's certainly a story that a lot of people, who vaulted a little while ago would have had. And fortunately for me, my high school coach was very talented and knew what was going on. He brought myself to 16 feet in high school, my teammate to 15.3. He actually won the state title his junior year and was jumping higher than I was at the time. And then after we graduated, he had 2 other athletes, 17-footer and a 16-footer within the span. So I mean, this was just it was a 4A high school in Spokane, but he's a great high school coach and really good at some of the fundamentals and stuff. So I just got lucky. I think a lot of early success is how fortunate you are to have a coach who really understands the event. You know what I mean? And I think there are a lot of people who start late, but if they start in the hands of good, coaches, you see some, a massive ramp sort of thing. And
Right.
So for me, it was dabbling around, having fun. It had enough fun in junior high to where I was excited to learn more. And then I jumped 14 feet as a sophomore, which was I was really excited about. And my junior year, I actually got a stress fracture in my back from high jump. I was pretty flexible, and so I had quite a bit of arch over the high jump bar, and I think it was a little too much compression in my low back, so I ended up pulling up a stress fracture down there. My pole vaulting and high jump kind of got shut down my junior year, so I kind of had to rely on my senior year to get a bigger mark, and then that was 16 feet at the end of it.
So you jump 16 feet, and then you're recruited by University of Washington, or how did
Not
that all
really.
shake out?
Yeah, not really. That's a good question. Well, I graduated high school at 17, so I was a bit young. And WSU, after I had jumped 16, was fairly heavily recruiting me, and they ended up offering a third ride.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, so I mean, I was pumped because 3 months ago I wasn't even thinking I was gonna be in pole vault in college, sort of thing. So it got exciting. And it was pretty funny. I mean, obviously as a young kid, when you jump high enough and you start getting kind of courted by colleges, it's an exciting time. And he was really the only one showing interest. We, just from my parents' standpoint and knowing kind of what kind of money we had to put ourselves, for my parents to put me through school, it was certainly going to be an in-state situation. And so anyway, I had a good visit over there. I had a really good time, and I knew I wasn't one of those kids who thought like I'm going to go to the Olympics and I really want to like pole vault as high as possible. I thought this was a fun thing to do to distract me from school. And so I ended up realizing that I wanted a business degree. And out of the two schools, UW and WSU, UW has a significantly better business degree. So I thought, well, I definitely want to make sure I'm getting the education that my parents are going to be paying for, and this is the best place for me to do it, which was UW. So I called UW, and they really didn't recruit me. I kind of called them and said, hey, I'm really interested in jumping in your program. And they said, well, you can come out. But I didn't know anything about the visit situation. So it was like, Mom, Dad, can we go check out UW sort of thing. They didn't bring me on an official visit.
Right.
So, we're paying for gas and we're paying for everything. And we get over there and I meet Pat Licari, and Pat at the time was a volunteer assistant coach. And so it was this guy who nobody really knew, who had a big vacuum in the back of his old 4Runner because he was carpet cleaning at the time.
Oh, wow.
And, this is coming from like against WSU professional coming to my house, sitting down with my parents. And, I'm like, I'm not really getting a good vibe here. And so then I went and met Pat, and I really liked him. I left going, man, I still just want to get my degree at UW. So I called Pat on the Total Bluff and said, if you guys don't do anything for me, I'm going to go to WSU. And he goes, I can give you books. And I was like, sold, because I was coming there anyway, so books is not, it's like a 1% scholarship, if that, right.
Right.
But what was also kind of funny and a little disheartening at the same time was the guys who helped, who are running my official visit at WSU, who are good dudes, were getting a lot of slack from their coach, thinking that they blew the visit. And at the time, and hopefully it's changing, but there was the old saying that like, if you want a 17-footer at WSU, you recruit an 18-footer. It's known as it's a big party school.
Oh, I get it now. Okay, I'm sorry. Yeah. I just got that joke. That was really bad.
No, I saw you shaking your head. I was like, oh no, I used to think.
Okay, that's a great strategy. Now I get it.
Yeah. So, but there is a little bit of kids go there. They start enjoying the party scene a little bit, and then their athletics go down. And so anyway, it was just kind of a funny deal because the coach was blaming the kids that I didn't have a good enough visit and all that. But in my head, I was going to go to UW the whole time. And that's kind of how I made my decision, was based on where I could get the best education for the money.
That's wild.
That was something I didn't get to experience. So I had an interesting high school path. I had jumped high my junior year in high school. And then my senior year, I had an accident that basically put me out for just about 2 years. I had a bad accident that caused a shoulder dislocation and to get reconstructive surgery. And Jake and Luke got to do the whole rounds. They got to go to Alabama and Washington and Kansas State. And all I went to was North Central College, Division III school in Naperville, Illinois. It was awful.
It wasn't that bad.
Sorry,
I ended up going there.
No, the college wasn't awful. Our dad was the coach. It was good in that sense. But it was awful that I feel like I didn't get to experience what 16-9 vaulter in high school as a junior should have been able to experience.
Right.
Yeah.
I guess
that was rough.
Was Washington and Washington State, were those the only two that you were like, this is it, or were there other options?
Yeah, they pretty much were, because I wasn't jumping high enough to get a full scholarship anywhere.
Yeah.
And truth be told, I mean, hindsight is one thing. I didn't realize like Stanford at one point was kind of, making a lot of phone calls, doing some of the early prep work from a recruiting standpoint. And I didn't take my SATs super seriously. Like I didn't, really study for them or anything. I took one round of it and I got a high enough score to get into WSU and UW. So when I was talking to the Stanford coach, he was like, hey man, we think we can get you in here. And one, I didn't think my parents could afford it. And then two, he was like, you got to bump your SAT scores up a couple hundred points. I was like, it just sounds like work. And I don't think my parents can afford the school. And then come to find out, once you pretty much get accepted to Stanford, like you can just get put on enough academic aid to where you pretty much don't even see any costs.
Oh, geez.
Yeah, there's some tricky things that they can do. And I know this a bit because when I coached at WSU, the hard thing is getting a student into Stanford. And once you can get the student into Stanford, you can get a lot of academic aid. I mean, at the time, we pretty much, my dad is a police officer. He's retired now. And my mom at the time wasn't working. So I think I would have fallen in that, financial aid package really nicely. And it could have been an option for me if I had tried to pursue it a little bit more. But I don't have any regrets.
You ended up doing all right for yourself. So
appreciate it.
Actually, that's really random because, I went on a official visit to University of Washington and they offered me books too.
You go. Was it with Pat or was it with,
It was with Pat, and actually we met out there.
You and I did.
You and I did. Yeah.
Okay. So what year would that have been?
2 seconds.
Got it.
It was what year? 2006. 2006.
Okay.
I mean, you were crushing it. Like it was a good time to be out there and meet Brad Walker. It was pretty cool.
Cool. Yeah. I was there through 07. So you were right. And after at the end of 05 I had a #1 world ranking. So it was a good, that was a good time to meet. I wish Pat is a phenomenal college coach, and he did what he did and had several national champions with like getting kids on books, like he didn't have support from the administration to like get really high level scholarships like for his pole vaulters. And so he did a phenomenal job from that standpoint. But
I just remembered this. I was being recruited at the same time that Scott Roth was. So I'm sure that they probably maybe offered him a little bit of money or something like that. But anyway,
it's possible. What I'm saying though is like that school was stingy for pole vaulters, and Pat didn't have a lot of money.
I never knew that. That's fascinating, and I think that that's a good point. We've talked about it before on the podcast. Is like all you young pole vaulters out there that are like, dude, I'm going D1 full ride scholarship. Like it's tough. I don't know if I've personally met like a pole vaulter, that's gone on a full ride Division I big school scholarship, and I'm sure you have, but I just think that is something that whenever athletes go into that realm of being recruited and things like that, just, you have to be realistic and you have to be honest with yourself and be like, okay, like, I may be looking at a half scholarship, or a third, like you were talking about, and things like that. So it's a good lesson,
Yeah. One thing, I mean, as I know, a lot of younger pole vaulters will probably, are probably part of the fan base that listen to these. I think one thing, two pieces of advice, and this is coming from a coach who worked in the Pac-12 at a D1 program. The piece of advice that I'd give is, one, don't simply wait for coaches to reach out to you, because most of my recruits, like I wasn't great at recruiting because a lot of, the day happens, right? You're coaching high jump, you're coaching pole vault, then I have an elite group. And then I'm traveling on the road, and I'm not with the team, then I'm with Katie trying to get her up and running. And then all of a sudden it's like, yeah, recruiting gets put on the back burner. So what I'm trying to say to these young guys is, don't feel like you are being neglected if a coach doesn't reach out. And it's really advantageous for you to put yourself on their radar just with an intro email, throw a video on there and say, this is who I am. Because that's kind of number one, is that it's really easy to not see talented people as a D1 coach. And it's like, but it's their job and they should be scouting. It's like life happens for everybody, and it's really tough. And then the other thing that I would say, and this is for athletes who maybe are in a little bit of a better financial situation, is don't always go where the money is being thrown at you, right? And it's like, understand the coaching scene and understand who you really want to work with, and then try to navigate it from those two things. So put yourself on every coach that you find interesting's radar, and then try to understand and see what you can, where you're at in all of those situations. Because those two factors can really help kind of narrow down where you should go and where it's going to be the right fit for you. And, that being said, if your parents don't have any financial support that they can give you, then all of a sudden it's like the full scholarship may be the one to take. But I do think if there's a piece of advice for young vaulters is, once somebody popped up on my radar, I mean, I'd certainly make the phone calls, bring them out there and all that stuff, but I just wasn't the best at, finding the talent always. And I know that I wouldn't be the only college coach in that situation.
Yeah. And maybe people don't understand too, that at these colleges, you might think that they have, from the outsider's perspective, you might think they have unlimited resources. These big Division I colleges, it's like, oh, well, they must have a bunch of people recruiting all day long and this and that and the other. And you're telling us that it was your job to recruit on top of trying to get your athletes to perform at, the highest level possible. And that is a lot. And a lot of these colleges have they're not funded a whole bunch, and they don't have a lot of time because they can't hire enough people to do just like that tedious stuff, like combing through recruiting profiles and things like that. It's difficult. So you have to take some ownership in what you want to do and what you want. And I think those go-getters, those kids who are like, dude, I am doing everything I possibly can do to pole vault and be the best pole vaulter I can be, will probably end up finding that. So
yeah, no, I agree. And the last little piece that I'd give on that is the other thing that you run into are, I had a pretty good, the coach who I worked with was definitely supportive. Like I tried to recruit, oh shoot, why am I blanking right now? He just signed with Puma.
Casey.
Sorry, Casey, buddy. I know who you are. My mind does that to me. But I recruited Casey, went to his house, brought him out, all that kind of stuff. And my coach was saying, hey, like, I know this kid's talented enough to give a full ride. So certainly let's do it. But also there are plenty of stories, and this happens, like, I can talk a little bit more freely, let's say, about Pat Akari and his situation. When your head coach is a distance coach, they're going to have a natural distance bias. And especially if they're a distance/cross coach, they know that they get a 2-for-1. So they get really good cross kids and they get really good distance kids, and they can they put all their money there. So for example, you're going to get kids who feel offended where a big program gives them a full ride, and then the other program gives them, hey, I got 40% for you. And it's like every assistant coach's like bane of their existence is knowing that I'm offering a really small scholarship to a kid who deserves more. And the kid's going to be insulted by that, but the coach is like, dude, I want to do more. Like, I just can't, and they think it's lip service. I remember a situation where one of the coaches was recruiting a thrower who was one of the best in the country. And she goes, I honestly stopped recruiting her because I couldn't give her a full ride. She was like, it was going to be insulting. So I think it's just, as young kids, you don't see that side of it. And then you're like, well, screw that school. I'm not going there because they didn't offer this. And it's like, there's more going on. And sometimes it's the coach's hands are tied. So, that's just something you want to ask. And as you try to navigate that situation, to say, don't rule out, a super talented coach, because there may be some behind the scenes things that you don't realize that are going on. And my deal was go where you want to go, jump your butt off, and then all of a sudden, that scholarship starts rising.
Well, I think that's a really good point, because you're talking about how you went on books to University of Washington, and then you went in as a 490 vaulter roughly, and then you end up jumping 580, 19 feet roughly, and by the end of your collegiate career. So you went where you were like, okay, well, I feel like this is roughly a good, I'm kind of speaking for you a little bit right here, but roughly where we thought this was possibly a good fit. And then, not a whole bunch of money thrown at you, but in the end ended up working out really well, which kind of brings us into, this is where I kind of lost track of what, back whenever when we were following you, it was, 06. So information was kind of still difficult to find, like, what's he doing, and how did he get to where he's at. So that was where I was like, okay, well, Brad's done with Washington, and I'm assuming he's not going to stop vaulting. So where'd you go from there?
So 2000, it was December of 2006. A buddy of mine who was a javelin thrower was deadlifting, and he was deadlifting, I don't know, I think it was 4 something. And I wasn't deadlifting at the time, like as part of my training, but I was just kind of a meathead. So I was like, oh, I want to try that. So I stood up with the bar and I got the lift, but I know that I rounded my back a little bit as I got it. And then I've just felt something a little weird in my back. And from that point on was kind of the beginning of the back pain and back issues that I had suffered. So by the beginning of 2007, I was experiencing quite a bit of back pain. And Pat, I don't know if Pat recommended it, but Pat knew that a lot of people were seeing a guy named Dan Path, who was really good at getting people out of their injuries and kind of back to health. And so it was early 2007 that I started working a lot more with Dan, and Dan kind of started put me back together in a way and helping me understand my body of like what's going on. And so it was not that I was like done with UW. It was that my injury was kind of forcing me to seek other expertise in the track and field world. And that brought me down to Dan. And at the time they were in Northern California, in the Stockton area. So that's where I took off to.
Okay. That wasn't too far off. Wasn't 2007 was it Indoor World Championships in Japan?
It was Outdoor Worlds in Japan. Osaka,
Outdoor
Japan,
Worlds
in
in Japan. So that wasn't too far off a back injury then. You were able to, what was it, 586, that one where you kind of pulled that arm over the top and finished?
Yeah. So there is a bit of a story to that one. If you want me to get into it.
Let's hear it.
Yeah.
That's my all-time favorite Brad Walker jump, by the way. There used to be a video on YouTube called The Pole Vault Greats, I think it was. Little tiny tangent. I lived with 3 of my best buddies in Naperville, and we all went to college together. We were all 16, 17 foot vaulters at the time. And we had practice at 3:30, and at about 3:00, it was just whenever you got the HDMI cables coming in and you'd plug them into the laptop and beam it onto the TV. And that Brad Walker 586 slow-mo jump was right whenever we'd be like, all right, pause that thing. We got a 2-minute drive down to the track and let's get warm and get her going. I kid you not.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
But share with us about that, because I'm curious about that one.
Yeah, well, so the back pain really started in December at that deadlift. And I mean, I had a disc herniation. It ended up being 8 millimeters. Later on in the career, it ruptured and I had surgery on it. But in that particular period of time, that started to really hurt me in the indoor season of 2007. I went over to Australia and I had a really good series of meets there. I wish my memory was a lot better. It's not great, but I do remember a few. I don't know if I had like a 70 and 2 90s or like a couple 70s and a 9. I know I jumped 96 and I took shots at the American record down there, but I was pretty much only going meet to meet and not doing any practice because my back hurt quite a bit. So I would do things like leg press instead of squats to try to, get good strength moves in without having to put too much stress on my back. And it was kind of funny because the Australian newspaper at the time, I don't know if it was the newspaper that wrote it, but something came out that I wasn't really they didn't really want me to come back because they thought Alex Parnov was coaching me too well, and I was beating the Australians because of Alex's help. And I was like, holy cow, this is funny.
Yeah.
So fast forward, I continued to jump well in the outdoor season and early outdoor season, but I was getting more and more back pain. And I'm just thinking more and more things. I can give you the long version or the short version. The long version's kind of funny if you want me to go through that one.
This is just fascinating to me because from the outside, we were like, Brad Walker's killing it, man. He's jumping this, he's jumping this. We had no clue. No clue. We were in severe pain this whole time.
I saw it as this guy just is jumping 19 feet, no problem, nonstop. It's crazy to hear that you were battling some adversity.
Let's go to the long version. I want to hear the whole thing.
The long version has a trip to Canada that's pretty funny that I'll tell you about. So, but anyway, so early outdoors is going okay, dealing with pain, getting some jumps in. But each meet is getting worse and it's becoming like a pretty significant problem. And I remember going to Monaco, and I have some like fantastic memories and some terrible memories of Monaco, but at Monaco, I don't think I jumped particularly well. It was I think it was the Golden League back then. So Diamond League, Golden League were pretty much synonymous now, but it was the last meet. It was 6 weeks before Worlds. And I was in so much pain that I called Dan Paff, because I don't think he was in Monaco with me. And I said, Dan, I have to do something like this. I can't go to Worlds feeling like this. And he says, well, there's some guys in Canada who are really good at getting people healthy. And I was like, okay. So I flew from Monaco to Canada, and I was supposed to see a series of doctors and therapists up there. And at the time, I was also I liked supplementing. Like I enjoy kind of the human body and the function of it and what things can do. So I was doing an adrenal rebuild, and the adrenals are they sit right on top of your kidneys, and they basically have to do with all your stress hormones. So epinephrine, norepinephrine. I mean, they pump out cortisol. They do all sorts of things. I think they spit out cortisol, but so if you're under a lot of stress for a long period of time, you can really tax them. And so Dan was like, hey, there's this adrenal rebuild you can do. And it's just 3 herbs. It's licorice, ashwagandha, and ginseng. And all of them are known as adaptogenic herbs, which basically just mean combat stress. And so, and I had already played around with ginseng or had ginseng before, but my body really likes ginseng. It makes me really explosive, and it makes me really like kind of angry and irritable. And I didn't really know that at the time. So I'm like taking this ginseng and I'm like, I feel great. And just, big jumps and stuff like that. So anyway, that was part of the reason that I get into the ginseng, is because it comes into play when I went to Canada. So I show up in Canada, and I'm in a lot of pain, and I have 6 weeks before Worlds. So for anybody a lot of the elites will know exactly what I'm talking about. Maybe people who haven't, there's a time pressure, and when any major championship's coming up, especially if you're already on the team, like you feel like right now, I mean, I talked to Katie today at practice, and some of the girls that I coach, like every one of these girls feels the time constraint of the Olympic trials and or Olympic Games. And it's like this very tangible, like, it's there, you can't not think about it. And that time is pushing up against you. And so when things aren't going well, that time causes a lot of stress, because you're like, I don't have much time. Like everything has to be perfect, this, that, and the other thing. So I fly to Canada, and I'm under this time constraint. I'm dealing with a lot of pain, and I show up, and I get, there was this guy, I'm not going to name names, but there was a guy who I was supposed to stay with. And, he was a very like well-known and very talented therapist. And he was like, hey, you can stay at my house. And I'm like, hey, cool. Like nice gesture. And I'm all about it. So I get there like the first day. I think I did an MRI and maybe saw like one therapist, but not the guy I was supposed to. And then I give the guy a text. I was like, hey, can I stay or let me know when you're free and, where I should go and all that stuff. And he like didn't get back to me. I'm like, I'll just get a hotel, no big deal. Right. So I get a hotel, and then the next day I have a little bit more stuff. I haven't really gotten any treatment, but we were just kind of doing some of the initial stuff of, hey, what's going on in this kid's back? And then I saw one of the doctors, and he was like, well, I want you to see this guy first. And I was like, okay. And so later on that day, send a text, don't get, any message back, or maybe I get a message back, but it was just like, hey, wait a little bit. I'll get back to you. So the second night, so I'm kind of living out of a car, right? I don't have a home base or anything like that. So the second night I get a hotel room. And then the third, I'm pretty sure it was the third night. It was either 2 nights in a hotel or 3 nights in a hotel. But I kind of do this deal again where I'm going all day. I'm not seeing the people that I'm supposed to see. I'm getting really frustrated. I'm loaded up on ginseng, which makes me kind of like snap. I mean, yeah, if I'm about to, like, if the apocalypse happens and we all got to start, marching around and taking care of some things, like, oh man, I'm eating ginseng and I'm just going for it.
I'm going straight to the whole yield after
I
this.
just wrote it on my little whiteboard here. I'm like, get ginseng.
Get ginseng. There's a caveat to ginseng, and that is that make sure that your wife knows you're on it. Or a girlfriend, and say, hey, monitor my behavior, because if I start getting a little snappy, you might want to stop it.
Goodness, I had no idea.
There's also a bunch of different types. There's Panax and American and all these different things. But anyway, so let's say that it's the third evening that I'm there, and I still hadn't heard from this guy. And I sent him a text. I had plenty of time to stew on, what am I doing here? All this kind of stuff. So I'm just fired up. Like, I'm really mad. And I was like, I'm leaving tomorrow. I'm not going to work with these guys. And so I'm sitting at a little restaurant, and I had plenty of time to kind of develop the text that I was about to send this guy. And the text, I don't know how, we'll just say, like, I can be hard to deal with at times, and I'm not going to try to deny that. Right. So the long and short of it was, the text was basically, how about you get off your high horse and you respond to my text?
Oh, snap. That's the ginseng talking right there.
That's the ginseng. This is the ginseng talking. And the guy who wouldn't respond to any of my texts immediately responds. But like, that was my plan, right? I'm like, I'm going to make you mad so that you get back to me. So he does. And he said, you should think about what you say before you say it. And I immediately fired back. I've had 3 days to think about this text. I said, I'm leaving tomorrow. And basically that was the end of it. But I was trying to get under his skin, because I was like, look, track and field's not the most glamorous sport, but it's a respect thing. Just say, hey, get a hotel for this week. I can't host you. No problem, dude. Like, I've got the money to be able to get a hotel room. I just want some therapy. Everything would be good. So I just felt really disrespected. The ginseng was coursing through my veins, and I fired off a text. So then about 10 minutes later, I get a call from my coach, who's like, he goes, I don't know what you did, but I have never seen this guy even raise his voice to anybody. And he goes, I just got yelled at for about 10 minutes and was told to never send one of my athletes to this guy again.
Goodness.
And then I'm like, oh my gosh, now I've ruined the relationship between my coach and this guy and all this stuff. So anyway, that was kind of the sidebar. But the funny thing about it was, this group of doctors, a couple years later, were found to have crossed the border. They were working, I think, with like Tiger Woods and some very high profile athletes. And they had crossed the border with like HGH vials and a bunch of performance enhancing drugs in their deal. And so I look back and I was like, holy cow, I'm really glad I didn't go see these guys, because at the end of the day, it's like, you're seeing a doctor who's going to get you healthy, hey, I'm going to, and I'm just glad that I had nothing to do with that group.
That's
no association.
No association. Yeah, exactly.
Like, no offense to Canada, but whenever you said Canada, that was like, whenever I was like, I don't know. I've heard,
Well,
yeah. So, hey, good job. I mean, getting out of there. The ginseng pulled through for you once again.
The ginseng won the day. I came back. Basically, I had so to pick the story up from there. I left Monaco with 6 weeks before prelims of World Champs. I was strength training and speed training, but I didn't vault from that day, from Monaco until the prelims of World Championships. I had not touched a pole vault pole. So 6 weeks had gone by, a month and a half had gone by, and I hadn't pole vaulted at all. And it was kind of funny, because, not to throw Jeff Hartwig under the bus, but apparently this is a story that I heard. You'd have to talk to him. He probably won't admit to it, even if it is true. He was not having a great jump session in Osaka, and Jacob Pauli was there, who was also on the team, and Jillian Schwartz was at Jeff's session. And apparently he was just kind of having some run through issues, And this is what I heard, so it could certainly be wrong. It's all rumor mill. But he threw his pole down on the pit and started yelling and says, "How does Brad do this?" Because I hadn't pole vaulted for like a month and a half, right? And so he was freaking out. And the reason I didn't hear about it was because the other guy didn't tell me, because he didn't want to like make me feel better, you know, because we're all competitors, right? So it's like, I'm just going to let this one slide. And then he told me afterwards. So anyway, I show up at prelim really not knowing exactly what's going to go on. Like, am I going to be good? Can I pole vault still? Whatever. I mean, of course I knew I could pole vault, but it was like, I haven't done this for so long. And I remember taking my first couple jumps in warmups and you know, for those who understand the body and stuff, I mean, we all understand muscle memory, and then we all understand kind of tension patterns, and like fascially, there's lines of tension in the human body that are built for your sport. So like, for example, for us, if you're a right-handed pole vaulter, there's going to be like a line of fascia coming from the top of your right hand down across your body to your trail leg, because you're in this big diagonal stretch position, and that fascial plane and the muscles kind of associated are all going to be a little bit stronger than the left side, let's say.
Yeah.
And they have like studies, they show javelin throwers are like even more dynamic, you know, than we are. And like, there's these big fascial sheaths and stuff that just get built up that, you know, we would have as pole vaulters. And when you lose tension in that area, you lose a lot of your ability until you kind of regain that tension. So I remember warming up, like I could barely swing. And I mean, I'm on decent sized poles, so they come back pretty quick. And I couldn't catch them. Like I was like, this is going to go very poorly.
Right.
And so I managed to make it through prelim, and I was pretty stressed. I was like, I went up to Dan, who was there, and I was like, Dan, I can't swing. He goes, "Don't worry." He goes, "That session is all you needed to create the tension to be ready to go for the final." And either he knew or he was blowing smoke.
What did you have to jump to get into the final, if you don't mind me asking? Do you remember?
Usually 70 got us there. It's like 70 was the auto. And I can't remember if I jumped auto or not. Like 70 was auto, but I think at that meet, it didn't take auto to make it. So I'm guessing it would have been a 60 to a 65.
Okay, yeah. Cool. So yeah, I mean, still, yeah, that's just wild. To the average pole vaulter, it's like, oh yeah, you know, that was a rough day for you, but you were able to, you know, just come out and just throw down a 60 or 65, just, you know, get the fascia all tightened.
Get it all tight, get it tightened back up. Got to tighten that stuff back up.
So you make it to the finals.
So I make it to the finals. And I remember, out of all of the days, the day of the pole vault final was like the sellout stadium day, which was pretty neat. And so I walk out at the stadium, and you know, I was feeling a lot of back pain, and I was not confident because obviously prelims didn't go the way I would have liked it to, and all that stuff. And I remember just kind of saying, just throwing up a prayer, mostly just like, my prayers were always like, keep everybody safe. You know, it's like, this is sport. It's like not the end of the world, whoever wins and loses. But I mean, clearly I want to win, but it's kind of like, let's keep everybody safe, but also like, just being thankful for the opportunity. And kind of, I remember laying down when I first got out in the stadium and kind of looking up, and out of your peripheral, you could see kind of the top of the stadium, and like, just, it was packed and it had this cool vibe to it. And I just remember going like, yeah, this isn't probably going to go the way you want it to, but just like enjoy the experience. You know, you're here at a world championship final. And so that was before I started warming up. I warm up, I take my first jump, and I'm like, oh, it's all back. It all feels good. Like I just felt, I felt fast. I felt explosive. I had no problem swinging from short approach, went to full approach, had no problem swinging. And I was like, okay, I'm ready to go. Like I'm ready to go to battle. And that is how, I don't know how everybody feels when they get into competitions, but I feel like to this day, and even when I was competing, or especially when I was competing, that like if I'm cut from a cloth, it's like a warrior cloth. Like that's kind of how my mind works. It's like very direct, very A to B. Like this is my goal. This is what I'm going to do. And I'm going to, you know, fight for it, sort of deal. And so whenever I went to a major competition, that was kind of the mindset that I had. I was like, this is modern day warfare for me. Obviously I'm not trying to, you know, pretend that sport is war. You know, let's make sure that in today's society, people don't get crazy. And I have the utmost respect for military and everybody going through actual war, but it was just the frame of mind that I put myself in, you know, under competition. And so anyway, it was one of the craziest competitions that I remember jumping in, because I think at like 76 there was like 8 or 10 people clear with like very few misses. I mean, there was a whole bunch of people jumping really high. And I remember taking the jump at, I think I wanted to pass 86 and go to 91. And my coach was like, why don't you just jump at 86? And I was like, kind of like, whatever, fine, I'll jump at 86. So I jumped at 86. And I remember after I landed, I was like, that was the most painful jump I had taken in a long time. And I was like, I don't think my body can handle really any more of those. Mm-hmm. And so I do remember, I remember saying, kind of in that kind of prayer mode, I was like, this is all I have today. So if somebody else is better than me, then they're going to have it. And then like, it's kind of chilling to think about in a neat way, where I think the next guy who went down and cleared it was Dan. It was Roman. Mm-hmm. And then we started getting some pretty strong crosswinds. And you had all these guys who had like no misses or very few misses up to 76, and then a lot of them passed 81 and then just miss. And I was just kind of like, what's happening here? Like these guys were all lighting up, these bars, and this crosswind comes out of nowhere. And then a couple guys passed 86. So we had to jump at 91. And I don't even know if I even gave it a swing. Like I was just like doing everything I could to like brace my core for the takeoff. And it was just like trash. And it was just miss. And then all of a sudden I'm like, this is a crazy competition, because the last miss happened and I was like, I'm world champ. And I was like, it was crazy. I mean, it's awesome. A fun memory. Yeah.
That's insane.
This is might go on a bit of a tangent. I don't really know, but there's something that I wanted to address. It was one of the questions that we got on Instagram. So I posted up, hey, what are some questions you have for Brad Walker? And somebody asked something along the lines of the hairdos. You changed your hairdos a lot. And I feel like you mentioned the warrior mindset. One hairdo that came to mind was, I know it because me and my 3 buddies all cloned it. We all shaved it in somewhat of a mohawk with some lightning stripes on the side. I don't know if you recall that one.
Oh, I do.
So take us through that, because then you had the curly hair top. You had, I was somebody, at least our family, it was like, man, if you get a haircut, there's the potential for a PR. It was total superstition. Right. But take us through the hair.
Well, that was the deal, right? I just noticed a trend that almost every time I jumped after a haircut, I jumped really well. So
I told you it was.
Yeah, it was that. It was true. So that year, actually, 2007, I had a bunch of different haircuts when I was down in Australia and freaking killed it down there. And I would like cut it short, and then I'd be like, well, I got to cut it again because I want to jump well again. So I cut it shorter, put whatever. And so I just kind of had this, like, I'm not a super superstitious person, but I thought it would be apropos. It was just like, hey, they were going into the final of the Worlds. And so Jacob Pauli he wasn't my roommate, but he was one of the pole vaulters on the team. And he's just like, if you know him, I mean, he's just like, that's his jam, He's wild dude, guitar. But I mean, he cut hair, he just cut hair. And so he was like, let's do it. And it was funny because I'm pretty sure, and Jacob, apologies if I get this wrong, but I don't think he made the final. And he had hair dye and his clippers. And so he was like, what do you want? I go, just cut my hair however you want. I don't care. So he's like, oh, we're going crazy on this one. So he dyes the hair, he cuts the mohawk, he cuts the lightning bolts in it. And there was a day in between. And the next morning or the next day I roll out, and my mom later on said, all I saw was Jacob Pauli down there. I couldn't even see you. She was like, I thought you didn't come out of the tunnel to compete. And so she mistook me as Pauli and during that haircut. And it all
that was that you are I've probably had 3 or 4 people say that they mistaken you in that video for Jacob Pauli, because he used to do the shorter sides with a little bit on top and some stuff on the sides. That's awesome. So
that was his that was his brainchild. I just told him, hey, you got to cut my hair. And I said, you can do whatever you want. And he went to town on it.
We got to get some kid out there to send us a video of them PRing with that haircut. That would be sick.
Well, there was a few weeks at our house where me and my buddies all had, I kid you not, the high end tights with the lightning bolts on the side. And I'm like, guys, we aren't Brad Walker. We just all know
that's awesome. That's great. That's great. You know, those are stories that obviously you don't hear about when you're competing, but it's like,
sure,
it's just fun to hear that stuff. You're like, oh man, that's awesome.
Oh man.
So
go for it, Jake.
I have a quick question. So you talked about your warrior mindset, just like, I mean, if you haven't seen Brad Walker jump and you watch him jump, it in his eyes, I always tell our vaulters that we work with, like, I can tell when you're running on the runway in your eyes, like if you're coming in hot or if you're just, you know, kind of coming in there just soft. And it seemed like every single trip you took down the runway, it was like there was just this look in your eye that nobody could deny. You were not going to get in front of you. Don't get in front of this dude. He'll run you over, and doesn't matter what pole he's got in his hand, he's going to hammer that thing. So I guess my question is do you think that, because we always, my dad always used to tell us when we were growing up, you know, physical toughness precedes mental toughness. And we kind of debate back. It's a kind of a cool phrase to debate about. So do you think that your, you know, mental toughness came from just being just exceptionally mentally strong, or did you just build a savage body that made you extremely confident? It's kind of weird because you did have injuries and things like that, it sounds like, that I didn't know about. So did the physical toughness precede the mental toughness, or were you just always kind of just a mentally tough dude?
I always felt like my mind was stronger than my body, kind of from the get-go. And why I say that is because my body did break down a lot, but I kind of took that mindset into everything that I did. So I felt like I really worked hard to build my body up for the event. But it was because, you know, like there were phases where we're like popping blood vessels in our eyes trying to squat more, you know, things like that. And, you know, I think in a certain era, I mean, that's what the weight room was for a bunch of people, was like, let's go see how strong we can actually be, sort of thing. But it was, I think that was it was how it was built. And then my body got built around what my mind was able to push through in, you know, certain scenarios and that sort of thing. It's kind of funny growing up, you know, we all through kind of familiarity, we have certain ideas of like people who were around our family and stuff like that. And like, my dad's my dad. He's awesome. He's loving. He you know, was super supportive of my entire career. But I have friends come over and be like, whoa, your dad's intimidating. Yeah. I was like, dude, that's just dad. You know, what are you talking? I mean, yeah, he was a police officer, but that's just, you know, that's just dad. And I think that, you know, like father, like son. I mean, I think I had a sort of, I don't want to say I had an intimidating presence, but I've been told that by a lot of people, like so many times that I'm like, oh, I guess I probably do, because too many people have told me that. But I will say that I took my training and my competitions extremely seriously. Like, I get on my athletes because it's really easy. Like you say, you can see it in somebody's eyes. You can see it in their movements as well. And you can see whether they're using all of their nervous system to fire a muscle, even in something like an A skip and a B skip, you know? And so I get irritated when I see people just like joking around doing some pretty half-ass sprint drills. I'm like, if you're going to be on the track, going through the motions, like, go home. Like, if you're going to be on the track, use your nervous system, explode through what you're doing. Like, you're here for a reason. And that's kind of how I saw the vault. For me, was an area where I could really put all of my focus and stuff like that. So yeah, so I think that came out in my vault. And one thing that I didn't realize was such a big deal. One of my earliest coaches, his name's Reg Holbert out of Spokane. He had told me back when we had first started jumping, something that I think every young vaulter should hear. And I'll probably get all sorts of crap for this. Oh, you know, not everybody needs to think that way, this, that, and the other thing, but yeah. I'm not PC and I don't care if they say that. We'll put it that way. But my high school coach told me, he said, look, he goes, every time you get to go up poles is a promotion. When you get to go up poles, and I say get because a lot of people are like, I have to go up poles, right? They have their comfort pole and they try to squeak out every bar they can on this little soft pole. But like, when my coach told me every time you get to go up poles is a promotion, I took that for my entire career because I was like, the pole that I jumped 604 on, if I get to be on one pole bigger and get promoted one more time, like I own the world record.
Yeah.
And so I had limited amount of jumps in the tank because I kind of brought max effort in all my jumps. But every time I jumped, I was like, I'm going to blow through this pole because I want to be promoted today because that's what I'm here to do, sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's kind of, I think, what led to the intensity on any given jump was like, this pole is, it's not going to last. Like I'm going to go to the next one.
That is such a insane way to put it, and I absolutely am gonna steal that and take it to all my vaulters. I never really thought about seeing it as a promotion, but I feel like we're in complete alignment with that, where it's like big poles make you go high, man, and that you are like the exact example of that, where it was like, if you watch Brad Walker, I guess segueing into another Instagram question, but it just seemed like you were on just tree trunks, man, especially that 604 at Oregon. I was like, did that thing even bend? Like that was a huge pole. So I guess answering another Instagram question, it was tons of questions came in that were the exact same. Biggest pole that you cleared a bar on, biggest pole, or highest grip, takeoff mark. Like, can you just kind of take us through, like, I guess 604, I would assume, is the biggest put together setup. I don't know.
Yeah. That's the biggest pole I've ever used. I actually think my 590 jump was technically a lot better that day. That day was kind of funny. I'll kind of give you the American record story and then answer some of those questions through it. Sure. But so I sent you guys a little letter that I had put together for coaching some of the girls that I had, but it was a letter highlighting that your circumstances aren't going to be perfect. And like, you have to make the most out of them. And I gave them a lot of examples of things that were good and bad in my career. But in 2003 in college, I started getting these like mystery headaches. But well, I didn't start getting mystery headaches. I got a headache that decided to never go away. And it's actually something that I still currently deal with. I pretty much always have a headache. I have a lot of like kind of brain fog, and that lends itself to like fatigue. So I kind of got pushed out of the sport because my body was just like I'm fatigued all the time, you know, and it's a bummer, and I'm not going to like belabor that point. But in 2008, I was training down in California. Tommy Skipper and his wife had gotten this water alkalizer, and which is like high pH water. Mm-hmm. And I started taking that. I was on some other, supplements and doing whatever protocols, stuff like that. But basically, I started drinking this water, and I was like, the first night I drank it, I got a headache, but I could tell it was a different type of headache. I could tell it was more of like a reaction to the water. So I was like, oh, curious. Kind of my entire career was one long experiment on my body, going like, what's going on with my body? Yeah, it was seriously like, I've done so many. I was gluten-free, dairy-free, and refined sugar-free for 9 years. I've experimented with like water supplements, all sorts of therapies. I mean, I've done crazy stuff. Like, we're talking like chi healers and, just weird random things that probably people don't even need to get into. But anyway, I was drinking this water, and I started to feel what I considered to be health. And I hadn't had that for a long time. So like, my friends, people who I was training with, we'd all go to practice, and I'd sit on a chair while they're playing basketball because I was just tired. And then it was like, now it's time to start practice. And now I'm going to grind through it. And a lot of it was willpower, and for a long period of time. And then all of a sudden I'm drinking this water, and I'm like, something's like lifting off of my shoulders. Like, things are feeling better. And all of a sudden I'm like, this is like healing me. I don't know what it's doing, but this is healing me. And so then all of a sudden, and I know that, like, I asked Dan, who did a lot of like soft tissue work, he goes, Brad, your body feels different. He goes, something's going on. All of my PRs started going up. I've like overhead shot throw, beat my old PR by like a meter, which is a massive, PR in one day.
Right.
And so anyway, just all these things were happening. I remember having like, I could pound like 3 Red Bull and be like, oh, I feel pretty good. And I remember having 1 Red Bull, and I felt like I was like a antelope. Like, I felt bouncy and springy. And I was just like, this is a totally different thing than I had experienced for a long time. And so that was that run where I went on I jumped the American record at 6:04. The next meet, I jumped 6 meters and then went into trials. And I actually got one of those machines. I brought it over to Beijing. I had this whole other story, but basically the day of the American record, I woke up and kind of just knew it was like a day. Like I was like, something's going down. And so I show up at the track. I feel great. I feel super fast. I opened at 70, and I'm pretty sure it was my biggest 70 ever, but it was like I was standing on the bar. I remember, this is kind of funny. Sorry, Derek. Derek was the only person I think left in the competition, and he cleared 70. And then I remember being frustrated because I wanted to go to the American record like immediately. I was like, this is happening today. And he jumped 70 and the bar had to go to 80. And I'm like, now I got to wait. Now I got to wait for Derek to jump this before I can put the bar where I want it to go, which probably sounds super cocky, but in the moment you're just, when the day's on, it's like, I'm here to do something.
Yeah, I get it.
And so he went out at 80, and then the bar went to 90, and 90 felt like a great jump. And it definitely was the best jump of the day, I think. And then the bar went to 6:04. Oh, so to answer the question, that day, I think I opened on the 11.7, which is like, I don't think they rate poles after 215. So it's just, the biggest weight rating you can get, but at 11.7, 520, I think I was holding around 508 to 510. Gosh, that was at 70. And I don't remember if I went up poles for 90 or if I went up poles for 6:04. I probably went up poles at 90, to be honest, to the 11.4, and probably only took like one finger or two of grip. And that jump felt great. And then when I went to 6:04, which is pretty common, so for every young pole vaulter, for every old pole vaulter, for every talented vaulter who hears this, your first couple steps set up the entire rhythm of the approach. And when you get excited and you see a PR, you go to frequency instead of drive. So you go to frequency too soon, you're going to hit red line at about the mid. If you hit red line at the mid, you lose body posture. The acceleration kind of stops, and all of a sudden you start kind of losing yourself a little bit. So at 6:04, I had gotten too excited. I got out of the back too quickly. I lost my pole drop, and my pole, I remember specifically like leaning back into takeoff, but going like, screw it, and just kind of like slammed everything forward at the last minute. And when you say the pole looked like it didn't bend very much, it's because I didn't really get it. Like I didn't get the jump. Like I didn't get through the takeoff in a way that I would have wanted to, but just pulled the trigger on it, and the bar stayed up.
That was
man.
Awesome moment. That video there's so many videos, but there's one from far away behind the pit that I've watched over and over and over. One thing I wanted to touch base on though was, I don't know if it was that meet or shortly after, something my dad and I were actually watching. It might've been the Olympic trials, but I remember my dad said one of the most impressive things he's ever seen in the pole vault wasn't you clearing the American record. It was I think you cleared 570 or 80 or thereabouts. And you had hung on to the pole because you had used some sort of sticky, but the pole was legit like 2 feet out of the box. And then you whipped it off and still made the bar by 2 feet. And it was like, how in the world is this dude capable of pole vaulting, clearing a bar, pulling the pole 2 feet out? It's almost like it was an extra competition.
I know how. He was on an 11.4.
Yeah. So were you strapping? You had to strap your hand to the darn pole?
Yeah. So that was 2012 Olympic trials.
Yeah.
And at the time, I was on sticky grip, and I had my own little experience of like, this is what I started with, and this is what I figured out worked good. And you have your whole equation. I think you talked about that in one of the earlier podcasts with somebody. It might have been Katie actually, but what I had found was, I'm pretty sure I was using Super 77 at the time. And for whatever reason, when Super 77 got wet, it actually got more tacky. So it was cool because under a lot of pressure, it's like when you get a lot of tack, that's great. But it was raining. And so I think the bar was at 65, actually, if memory serves me correct. And I got off the pole how I normally would. And all of a sudden the pole starts coming. And I was like, I gotta get rid of this thing. And that was that shake off that you saw.
For those of you who don't know, whenever he says Super 77, so I just renovated a van into a camper van, and I used Super 77 to adhere the insulation to the walls of the van. So this is what he's spraying on his hand, and then basically just locked in. Like, okay, so explain a run. Like, if I don't even know if you run through. I'm How does that even work? Like, if you just have to bail, does your hand just come off?
Yes and no. Yes and no. I did not run through a lot in my career, but certainly I ran through. I mean, it's obviously you get blown with a crosswind and you're all twisted. You're not going to take a jump.
Yeah.
So the thing about the sticky, well, two things that are interesting about the sticky. One, when my headache started appearing was when I was kind of transitioning from chalk to sticky. So I'm not a proponent to say use harsh chemicals in your body, because I don't know if that's what started my headaches or not, to be perfectly honest. But if you are jumping high enough to be able to look straight down the pole. Like if you just put your hand in front of your face and you're looking straight down the pole and you're releasing the pole, you're going to see that you're going to peel away with your pinky going away from the pole, and it's going to roll off the side of your forefinger.
Mm-hmm.
So if I was on, like with sticky grip, like if I came off the jump nice and vertical, I would have a nice peeling away, and it could always get rid of the pole that way. If you're like fixed on and you just try to throw it in front of you, like there's too much surface area and that peel doesn't happen, and it doesn't want to go. So if you were doing a run through, you could kind of like turn a little bit sideways. And when the pole hit the back of the box, you kind of just had to like peel your hand away really quickly.
You would have to kind of bail kind of early though, right? Like for it to not, maybe I'm over analyzing how adhered your hand is to the pole, but like I would feel like if I was like, you would have to make that commitment to like run through fairly early. Like if it was like a last minute thing.
Yeah,
like,
there were. I mean, I would say there's probably not a lot of last minute bails like in my jumping. So
okay,
it's like
cool.
if I made it to that point, it's like I'm leaving the ground
for sure.
And then if I was going to bail, then generally I would generally have enough time to decelerate to then maybe stop before the box if I knew like, hey, this is, if at the mid mark, let's say I get hit with something with a big cross, it's like, well, you got 4 full lefts to slow down.
Yeah,
right. But it was a problem, and there were times. I remember I think you told a story about Derek Miles on one of your podcasts talking about him. Like there were plenty of times where if you didn't put a backer wrap around your sticky, as in like a second layer of tape that had a little bit of adhesive to then adhere to the cotton side of the tape, because I would have sticky side out. Mm-hmm. If I took a jump without having a little bit of a backer on there, the whole entire piece of tape would rip off in my hand. You couldn't see my hand. You could just see the tape that was covering my hand.
I knew that happened.
Yeah, that happened quite a bit. That happened quite a bit, actually. Yeah.
Okay, cool. I wasn't just seeing things that day. Yeah, that's crazy. Okay, I have a true or false. So like we had talked about earlier, in 2006, whenever we were following you a whole bunch, it was hard to find good information. And as I progressed into my emerging elite career, I was a 555 vaulter. I was trying to get tidbits of information about everybody so that I could, better myself. Mm-hmm. And in one of the conversations that I had, somebody had told me that you got mercury poisoning by eating too much fish. Is that true?
That is untrue.
I was like,
that is untrue.
I've heard that too, and it wasn't from Jake. So that is,
dude, that's so strange. I mean, because it could kind of fall into the conversations we've had. It sounds like you were super immersed in just all aspects of human performance, basically.
I certainly was. I did not ever feel like I had a mercury poisoning scare. I mean, I do enjoy sushi, but not to the extent that I could get mercury poisoning from it. No,
somebody told me that you had you were like, dude, Brad, the person I'm talking about, I'm not going to mention their name. They were like, no, dude, Brad Walker, he's on the all fish. He's on the all fish right now. And I'm like, he's on the all fish.
There was a period of, so this is interesting. So I had experimented with fasting. I had experimented with like being vegan, being vegetarian. there's an interesting thing that happens when you go like all vegetarian or you fast. If nobody's tried it before, the amount of tension in your body goes down significantly. And so it's interesting because as your body's tension goes down, your own personality kind of gets more quiet as well. So it's funny because you think of like vegans and kind of hippies and stuff like that. Like a lot of times they're very relaxed and stuff. And maybe that's because of the weed, maybe that's not, but but no, there's definitely something about you lose a lot of body tension when you don't have a lot of probably red meat, you know, like higher creatine content and stuff like that. But and with that decrease, you kind of have more of a relaxed mode. So I had experimented. It was actually going into, I want to say 2013 world champs in Russia, where I was doing all fish. I was like pescatarian. So I was like, I want to make sure that I'm eating protein. I want to make sure that I have some meat in my diet so I don't lose all body tension. But I also felt as though when I was dealing with a lot of pain and different injuries and stuff, that the less body tension I had, the less I felt those specific injuries. So I had played around with that for a period of time. So there's a half truth in there. I didn't get mercury poisoning with it, but
yeah, I mean, straight up, the person said you were in the hospital and everything. I was like, gosh, dang, that is commitment. All fish.
That is the same diet that I have, though. I guess you'd call it pescatarian. I don't like to use too many tags because if you're trying to make things not awkward and you're in front of a family and you might have a piece of meat or whatever it is. But I did 2 years no meat, just vegetables, seafood. My wife's fairly strict vegan.
Okay.
And whenever I stopped,
your wife's probably pretty mellow, right?
Yeah, she's very chill.
Pretty mellow.
She's very chill.
Yeah.
She needs to be chill. She's
got to deal with you.
A doc at a pretty wild hospital, and the vegetables chill her out.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
But the point is I went cold turkey, no meat. It was due to food poisoning. I had a bad steak on a corporate trip, and it was no good for 2 or 3 days for me. And I said, I'm going to stop eating meat. And Jake, I don't know if you remember this, like 2 years ago, I called you guys up. I'm like, I'm just not going to eat meat anymore.
Yeah, it was random.
I ended up going wild in the veggie smoothies, you know, quinoa, kale, like not just like, you know, the fake cheese and tater tots vegan. It was like very, very, very nutrient dense foods.
Mm-hmm.
And I had an enormous amount of energy, and I actually started running. I started running, you know, distance, I guess you'd call it, you know, doing marathons, and I would go out and do 10, 15, 20 mile runs because I had an enormous amount of energy.
Mm-hmm.
And then I slowly started working fish back into the diet. And whenever I worked fish back into the diet, I started lifting more, and I had the drive to get it back into the weight room. And it was just insane how if you do alter your diet, your body does adapt to it. And I'm yet to, I've had a couple slip ups here and there where I've had meat, but, and one of them was actually this weekend. I was back in Chicago with some family. and I'm curious, how was your segue back into eating meat? Are you currently eating meat?
Yeah. Well, yeah. So the thing that I would say about kind of what you just described, what I found most intriguing was that you can change parts of your personality by changing the foods that you eat. To me, that's like mind blowing, right? Yeah. So for somebody who, let's say, is chronically eating fast food, right? Like you're going, not only you're eating garbage, but you're eating garbage with a bunch of chemicals that are going to kind of alter your brain function and, you know, do this, that, and the other thing. So if you have, let's say, some kind of bad ADHD, this, that, you know, and then all of a sudden you go to like straight vegetables, you're going to notice a massive shift in the way your brain works and the way you feel. It's crazy how much of an influence that has. And I even remember thinking, oh, wow, like this is why carnivores are aggressive and herbivores aren't. It's like, well, yeah, it makes sense because carnivores have to go get their meals, but it's like they want to go get their meals because they have that more tension and aggression. Whereas like the herbivores are just kind of chill that, you know, it's just, you know, kind of physiology is interesting to me.
Interesting. Yeah.
Maybe throw some ginseng into the vegetarian diet.
see what that brings. But I said that, and you had a question attached to this, and I was getting there, and now I forgot what the question was.
Kind of just how your nutrition journey has been. Like, I mean, throughout all those different stints, and then now kind of where your diet's at.
Yeah, well, first of all, the advice that I would give, this is an interesting thing that won't make sense unless you've gone through it. You know the saying, like, the devil's in the details.
Yep.
Like, you can get too microscopic and be searching for perfection so hard that you start getting pretty far away from it.
Oh yeah.
And so I would say that I took nutrition to a bunch of different random places, and looking back, a part of me wishes I just ate the way I did when I was young and dumb and didn't really care. You know what I mean? And when I say that, I mean, like, just eat good, clean food, you know?
Yeah.
Like, for everybody who wants to go on, I'm going to try keto this week, and then I'm going to try this, I'm going to try that. Like, you can get yourself into a really funky headspace. Like, for example, and I'm not saying this, but it's like, you're like, I slipped up and had meat. I'm like, dude, that's not a slip up. You just had some meat. You know what I mean? But our brains kind of process it where it's like, we start getting hard on ourselves, and you got to do this, you got to do that. And it's just like, no, just clean food is probably where we want to be. So as it relates to me now, I spent so much energy and time and focus on trying to do everything perfect. And the reason I was trying to do everything was perfect because I was trying to get rid of the fatigue that I was feeling and the headaches and, all the chronic pain that I was feeling. And then when I realized that I couldn't reach it through the experiments and food and things that I were doing, there was a long period of time where I was like, I'll do whatever. Like, I don't care. Cause like I said, I was gluten-free, dairy-free. I was gluten-free for 9 years, and I was dairy-free and refined sugar-free for probably about 4. And you can imagine how your food pool shrinks to, there's not a lot I can eat anymore. And then the joy of eating kind of gets thrown out the window, and then it becomes a chore. And then it's like, that's not a good place. And so for me now, I don't eat for high performance, basically. Yeah. But I think the thing to take out of this whole deal is food can have a dramatic effect in all sorts of aspects of your life. But if you're staying pretty good, eating clean meats, clean fruits and veggies, and some nice, carbohydrates in a pretty balanced way, you're probably checking off all the boxes that you need to without having to go crazy in any direction.
Did you ever get into, I know in certain times in my career, I got into certain ways of eating or training and just became like severely addicted to them, to the point to where it was like, if I went off the rails for one tiny little bit, it would have an impact on my confidence. It would have an impact on my vault. And then I would start to just tail off. It always seemed, for me personally in my career, I'd get on something and I'd become addicted to it. Let's say that it's lifting heavy, and I would trend up. And then I would be so addicted to it that I would trend all the way until it started to negatively impact my vault. And then I would tank. And then I would find a new thing and be like, oh, it's not the lifting, it's the nutrition. And then I would get off the lifting and I'd start, being super overly dialed in on nutrition. And then I'd like lose a bunch of weight, or like, become too obsessed with that. Did you ever have issues with that in your career?
I did. Yeah, I did. But I would say that the catalyst for that for me was not feeling good and trying to find how to feel better. And then got lost in that journey, right? Because you start going into all these different areas as you're trying to explore what's wrong. And so, yes, I certainly got in some of those headspaces. There was a year that I was way lighter than I had ever been. And that was when I was probably 2013, when I was doing the pescatarian stuff and all these different dietary changes that I hadn't tried before. But I think that's common for athletes who are, really dedicated and willing to make sacrifices that some people aren't. So I've actually had that with one of my athletes that I currently work with. We were just chatting about the idea that, like, there is a balance, and being happy in life is the longer you coach, the more you see that how somebody is doing in life, they're doing well in sport. And if they're not doing well in life, they're not doing well in sport. And clearly they feed off of one another, in an interesting pattern. But for the most part, when people are happy in life, their sport's going well. And they may think that they're happy in life because their sport's going well, but I don't think that it drives that way. I think it drives the opposite way. So when things in your life are good, things in your sport are good, barring an injury or something like that. And so I had a chat just recently about talking to one of my athletes just about the idea that, like, things are going to happen one way or the other, and you're going to survive them. And, for any athlete who's listening, maybe there's some elites in here who are like really trying to make Olympic trials or really want to make the Olympic team. Like, those are phenomenal goals. And I wish you the utmost success in achieving them. But talking to a guy who could have won 2 Olympics and coming home, no hiding at both of them, like, your parents are still going to love you and your friends are still going to be around. And the amount of pressure that you put towards yourself, like, it's all coming from you, Like, it's not like this world is just like staring at you, analyzing everything. So we create these huge problems in our own head, thinking that everything is way bigger than it really is. And then when you get to the backside of it all and you reflect on your career, it's like, yeah, so I didn't win gold, but I had the America record. I won a couple worlds and life goes on. You know what I mean? And you realize that the importance, like I jokingly refer to it as kind of, everybody who's out of high school can relate to, like, think about how serious we took our algebra or, calculus test in high school. And then you like look back and you're like, well, what was calculus going to do for me? You know what I mean? And it's like the amount of seriousness that you put on yourself in any given stage in your life is like the most important thing ever. And then when you get older, you look back and laugh at how naive you were when you were younger. And so it's kind of like trying to give yourself a little bit of a pass and say, you know what, for everybody who's listening to this podcast, who's trying to make a team or maybe trying to make Olympic trials, like, do everything you can and work really hard, but like, it's going to be cool. It's going to be fine either way. Your life's going to continue. You're going to get married. You're going to have kids. You're going to have a family. All of the successes and or failures you had in sport are going to be minor compared to the successes and failures you have, within your family and things like that. And I think the perspective is what can help younger athletes try to navigate those pitfalls like you're talking about, where it's like,
it's really powerful right there, man. I mean, that was very powerful. And that was one of the questions that I kind of had wanted to ask. I actually was like, do I ask him this or do I not? It's
the Olympics.
No.
Oh, okay. Got it.
Olympics. You know how many times I jumped 555 and you know how many times I have to answer the Olympics question? Well, I thought you were going to make it to the Olympics. I'm like, dude, I jumped 555. Like, come on, dude.
Yeah.
I can't stand it. Like,
at least you aren't the brother that they don't even know I exist.
Come on.
Like, yeah.
Didn't you have a brother who jumped pretty high in high school? What was his name?
Like, so are you Jake or Luke?
Yeah, right.
Josh.
I'm the
yeah.
Who is that?
Yeah, no, I didn't even know they had a third brother in the family.
So my question was, and this was something that just remind, there is one more story that I want to talk about your career before we move into your kind of second career here. But your transition out of professional athletics, I know, and there's millions of athletes out there who have had these dreams of becoming this and doing this and blah, blah, blah. And you have to eventually come to terms with it. And I guess my question to you is, have you come to terms with your career and do you have peace with your career? Because I struggled really hard afterwards. Actually hating the pole vault. Afterwards, I was like, I don't ever want anything to do with the pole vault ever again, because I was so bitter towards it, because I could not come to peace with the fact that I didn't do every single little thing that I wanted to do. So have you come to peace with your exit in your athletic career?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. Obviously a lot of layers to that one. I think that I could say yes. At least at the conscious level, yes, I have. I think that the way that my mind works is that I am very, what's in front of me, A to B, this is what I'm going to do, and this is how I'm going to go about it. And I don't spend a lot of time reminiscing about these like tangential thoughts or ideas. And there's a part of me that thinks that they're always there in the subconscious, and there's a layer of them affecting me that I don't really acknowledge. And so I'm sure that there's some things, I mean, there's certainly some things that bug me. We'll put it this way. The biggest struggle that I have regarding my career, and this may sound arrogant, and so I apologize to anybody if, whatever, but because of the headaches and the chronic fatigue that I felt throughout the vast majority of my career, like when I did the alkaline water thing, I felt good for like 2 or 3 months. And in my heart, and kind of in my head, I'm like, if I could train like this for a year, I think I could rewrite all of the records. Like that's how I felt. And I don't think that I'm far off. I mean, I had a couple of days where I was pretty high over some big bars where I was like, if I could string together a long period of time feeling this way, which is what I think normal is supposed to feel like, I could have done some things that people would have been really shocked to see. So the hardest thing looking back on my career is saying I did accomplish a lot that I was trying to. I would have loved to have had an Olympic medal, specifically an Olympic gold. For whatever reason, my goal was always the world record more than the Olympic gold. Like I would have, if you asked me, would you have an Olympic gold or world record, say world record. Even if the record was broken the next day, it was like to be able to jump higher than any human in history, knowing like on that day that you're walking around Earth that nobody has ever jumped higher than you is pretty neat. Like, congrats, Mondo. Like that's a pretty great accomplishment, really, and to cool. Renault as well. And so that was always my goal, and I didn't accomplish that. And a part of me feels like I had the ability to, but then there was some sort of gorilla or monkey on my back where I wasn't able to do that. And that sometimes messes with my head a little bit. And that comes into like probably a spiritual component where it's like I was given a certain trial and I was given that for a specific reason. And I've spent time thinking about the idea that if I had felt healthy and did the things that I think I may have been able to do in the pole vault, maybe there would have been a complete lack of, like humbleness, right? You're just walking around like an a-hole. It's just like, yeah, look at how good I am. I've done everything. You got, that I could see that could have been a problem that I would have not dealt with very well, right? Mm-hmm. So, maybe that's the lesson, or for whatever reason, there's a few things that I guess I wish I could have accomplished that I thought I had the ability to that I didn't. But also it's sport, just sport.
Yeah.
Like I chose to try hard at something for a long period of time, and then I accomplished a bunch of things, and now it's like the next chapter, and it's time to let that stuff be in the past and have the fond memories and stuff and just kind of move forward. So, there's a couple things that I wish I could have done, but overall, I think I'm able to move on with most of it pretty well.
So I kind of can segue into that story that I was talking about. So Olympic gold or world record, you would have chose the world record. I've always liked stories and things that like meant a lot to me personally. Like I've always been like, this time nobody knew what I was dealing with, and I personally made it through that, and I think that I would have chose the story that happened to you in Moscow over all of it, because that's one of the most badass stories like ever. Okay, so can we talk just really quickly about what happened in that situation? Because this kind of, for me, puts everything into, this is Brad Walker, the just complete utter savage on the runway.
Sure. Yeah. So those are, that is definitely something that stands out in my career. This is 2006 World Indoor Championships in Moscow, Russia. Back in the day, there was a prelim and a final, and they were back-to-back days. So it'd be like Friday, Saturday. And we had shown up, and I didn't have a coach there, but there was a guy who I knew who was like, hey, can you grab my step for me? And whether he got my step correctly or whether he didn't and just told me a number, I don't know. And it's not his fault. I mean, it's just, this is just how the story goes. So he told me my step was at around 12, which would have been under for me. I mean, I was generally taken off probably around 14, and 13.6 to 14 would have been considered probably a good step for me. So whether I had a bunch more of adrenaline and I didn't run hard on that run through, the next time I came down and actually took up the jump, I had taken off at around like 10, and I'm gripping probably, it was 3 feet under. So it was either 9 or 10, like it was really far under.
What?
But whenever I decide, like whenever I'm committed to jump, like I'm committed to jump. So it wasn't like, hey, there's this massive red light, you should stop. It's like, I'm going to plow through this jump. Well, I was on my starting pole, it bent. But because I was so close, it kind of like lifted me off the ground in a weird way, but I was running fast. So it was going to be a blow through if my step was on. So it was still kind of a blow through, but it kind of like lifted me off the ground and started rotating me to the back left corner of the pit. And so as I'm coming down, my feet and my butt land on the pit, and then my back and my head get thrown down to the track. So there was the metal curb on the track. So my shoulders landed on the metal curb, and then my head slammed down on the track. And my lights went out. I definitely got knocked out, but it was kind of only, I don't know if I was laying there. Like, I don't know if time had elapsed for other people watching me, but for me, it was like I slammed my head on the track, and then kind of like things were black for a second. And then like I opened my eyes and I saw a bunch of people running towards me. And for anybody who's ever had like a super stressful situation like that, when your adrenaline kicks on, like you're not thinking rationally, right? It was kind of like fight or flight. And so it was kind of like, I was embarrassed, number one, because I'm supposed to be a talented, world-class pole vaulter who just missed the pit. Right. And my life, these people are running towards me and they're rushing. And so I start like waving them away. Like, I'm like, get away from me, like, get out of here. So I grab my pole and I start walking back, and people are like concerned for me. But I was embarrassed and wanted to get back on the runway and take up the next jump. So I take another jump or two, and people are like worried and stuff, but like, this is probably where like, I'm not I've never claimed to be some like balanced, sound individual, right? Who has like, I'm passionate and emotional and like will make poor decisions and, all this kind of stuff. And so I get to the back of the runway and I take a jump or two and find my step and get on the right pole. And all I'm thinking in my head is, look, you might have done some damage. You might not be able to compete tomorrow, but you damn well better give yourself a chance to compete tomorrow. Like, that's what's going through my head. So I'm like, I have to hit the auto because I want the opportunity. Like, I know I'm going to go to the doctors, and I don't know what's going to happen, but like, I want the opportunity to compete on the next day. So I have to jump. The competition starts, and whatever they started at 40 or 50 or something. And as the competition's like wearing on, like, I'm like super nauseated, and I felt really pale, and I like pulled a garbage can next to me because I'm like, I think I may throw up. And this is before concussions were like thrown in our face, but I knew, I knew something was wrong.
Yeah.
And so I'd be like hovering over the garbage can, waiting for my name to be called. Then I'd take a jump, and then I'd go sit over the garbage can. And as soon as I jumped the auto, which I think was 70 at the meet, it could have been 65. It was either 65 or 70. As soon as I jumped that, the USATF medical staff like came out onto the track, talked to the officials, and like, we're going to take Brad. So they take me and they get me back to the tent, and they were like, all right, how you feeling, whatever. And I don't know how I looked, but they were like, all right, go ahead and count backwards by 7 from 100, which is actually kind of hard to do if you're not concussed.
I can't do that. Right.
Yeah. But I remember going 100, 93, 86, 76, 66. And then when I said like 56, I was like, oh crap, that's by tens. And I didn't know that. And I was like, something's. So they're looking at me wide eyed, and I realized that I had just made a mistake. They're like, Brad, I think we want to get you to the hospital to check you out. And so I was like, all right. And they were like, and then the Russians come over because we're in Moscow, and they're like, we're going to take you to an ambulance. And I'm like, guys, this is a little overkill. Yeah, I'm still embarrassed by it. Right. And I'm like, I don't want to go in an ambulance. They're like, no, this is Moscow afternoon. Like, it's rush hour. We won't get to the hospital if we don't get in the ambulance. So we get in the ambulance, we start driving, and I'm looking around, and they're like, this is a true story. I look out of the ambulance window, and there's a Hummer H2 driving on the sidewalk. There's snow, blanketed snow everywhere, driving on the sidewalk, honking at pedestrians to get out of his way. Like, this is just random Moscow traffic. Yeah.
Holy cow.
So then all of a sudden I'm like, oh, I guess the ambulance is probably necessary, because otherwise, we're in gridlock and we're not getting anywhere. Yeah. So we get to the hospital, and there's an argument between the nurse and the guy who's with me in Russian. And I'm like, this is odd. And they're yelling at each other. So then the guy stops and he talks to me, and he says, she doesn't want to give you a CAT scan until you have paid. But like, it's kind of the organization's job, like in Moscow, to take care of the medical. And she's saying, no, he has to pay. Then he pulls out a cell phone. He starts talking in Russian. He hands her the phone. You just see her countenance go from like, I'm in charge and you got to pay, to her head looking down to the ground going, follow me. And I'm like, whoa. I don't know what KGB dude he just called. and what he just threatened to this woman. So anyway, yeah, long story short, we do the CAT scan. I get cleared. We get back to the hotel at like 11 p.m. and I hadn't eaten since breakfast. And then I get a knock on my door at 11, and a medical staff from Russia knocks on the door. I answer it, and he says, "Can I see your CT scan?" I was like, "Yeah." Show him the CT scan. He holds it up to the light, and he goes, "This is very bad. You must not compete tomorrow." And so all of a sudden I'm freaked out, like, oh, maybe the hospital got it wrong. It was a bad experience. She didn't like me, whatever. So then I bring it to the USATF doctors, and they're like, no, you're okay. Like, this is Russia. They're just trying to get you out of the competition.
Oh.
I'm like, oh my gosh. So I try to go to sleep, don't get much sleep. The competition's the next day. And, the warm-ups were rough because I had a severe whiplash, and I had a lot of, headache and stuff. And I remember thinking, if I can land evenly and relax my neck so that my head and my shoulders land at the same time without flexing my neck really hard, I might be able to do this. And so I took a couple jumps from 4, felt like I could do it. Competition started, and I was in second place going into the 580 bar, and I had 2 misses. And if I miss, it was like, bottom of the 9th, 3 balls, 2 strikes. I was like, I have 1 attempt to make this happen. And so I pick up the pole, I run down there, and I cleared it. And I immediately stopped the comp. Like, last thing I want to do is try to jump a higher bar.
Right.
And so then 2 funny things about the end of this was that was my first world championship that I had won. The title that came out, instead of like athlete got concussed, comes back the next day, wins world championships, the title that came out was, this is the lowest winning height in world indoor championships history. That was the title that came out. Nobody covered the concussion or the backstory to any of it. And then I have a poster of the jump, and it's me clearing it, and I didn't touch the bar at all. And the bar was like half of the bar end was off of the peg. So like, the Russian officials had put it up there on purpose, in my opinion, to fall off if, the wrong wind came by, and it didn't. So
I mean, that right there, that's the gold medal. That's the world record, man. For me personally, like, I'm like, to be able to tell that story, I didn't know it was a third attempt either.
Third attempt. It was all or nothing, man. It was just like this. I got one crack at this.
Oh yeah. My gosh. That's crazy, man. I mean, that's gotta hold a lot of weight though. Like, looking back on everything, like, hey, that was a pretty powerful moment. That is an amazing thing that you did.
I appreciate it. No, I think looking back at it is, I think all of us in sport are looking to prove things to ourselves, right? And what we're trying to prove to ourselves is we're capable, or we're talented, or we're this, or we're that. And we all have our own thing that we're trying to prove. But for me, and especially kind of saying, hey, like, you've got a warrior mind. That's how I think about myself, right? Is like, cut from that warrior cloth, like I said. So a couple of these stories and dealing with adversity and pain and stuff like that is like, I feel as though when the pressure gets on and the situation's not good, like, can I mentally power through it and accomplish, big things? And that's kind of how I look at that. It's like, hey, you may not be in the right situation, or you might be going through some tough stuff, but you got a strong enough mind to handle certain things. And so no, I really do. I appreciate that. It was a struggle. And, the bummer thing for me, from an ego standpoint, is just that, like, nobody heard about it, like, nobody talked about it. It wasn't really, and kind of looking back, it's like, well, I really felt like I overcame a lot there. And the story was, well, you had the lowest winning height in world indoor history. It's like,
as rough. You told that story right at the end, you were like, I came down third attempt and made it. In my head, I was about to start just chanting USA after that. USA. That's so awesome. And we're actually, I mean, we've gone through quite a bit of time here, but if you don't mind, I would like to ask you about just kind of your transition into this new thing that you're doing about you're coaching down in Georgia. I think you're going to chiropractic school down there or something.
That's right. Yeah,
going to chiropractic school, and then you have found a way to. I talked with Katie about this on the podcast. You found a way to get some of that warrior spirit and put it into some of these elites. And particularly Katie, I saw on an Instagram post, she had a post, it was maybe a day or two ago, that had her back in the day compared to now, or you know, maybe 4 years apart or whatever it was. And I'm assuming that in that transition, it was working with you, and she followed you from Washington, I think, to Georgia to train, which says a lot. And some of your athletes have kind of come to you to work with you, and you've done an incredible job putting that warrior mentality into them. What has this transition into coaching like these elites been like for you?
Yeah, great question. And the other thing is, yeah, I mean, I'm good on time. I don't want to keep you guys on the phone if you guys got to go, but don't worry about the time thing. You know,
Okay,
Rogan's
cool.
on for 3 hours or so. We can run, but
right on. Yeah.
Love
no,
it.
I enjoy talking about this stuff because, you know, a lot of it is just stuff that, you know, people haven't heard or, you know, happy to share. As it relates to Katie, and the other gals that I coach, yeah, there's a lot of, I don't know, it's hard to say. There's a lot of things that go on subtly that I don't know if they kind of understand maybe some of the things that I'm trying to do, and maybe sometimes I don't even know some of the things that I'm trying to do with them.
Right.
The way that I see the vault and the way that I coach the vault, I think is different than a lot of people. And it may not work for everybody. So I'm not trying to promote this for other coaches or anybody to think about, but I coach a little bit of the psychology within the event as part of the execution of the event. So for example, did either of you guys grow up playing football at all? Or
I did a couple of years.
Okay.
I was
Pee-wee.
Okay. No, I mean, like,
thanks, Jake. Thank you.
This can be a lot of people. You can convert this to any different, really any different, any contact sport. Like, if you're going to tackle somebody at full speed, you're not going to lean back, right? You're going to lead with your shoulder, which means you're going to lower your body and you're going to get ready for this explosive like hit moving forward.
Mm-hmm.
And so like, as I coach the vault, there are certain movements that lend themselves to a psychological thought that adds or detracts from the movement. So the way that I try to position my athletes is to put them in positions that make their mind want to continue to move forward and hit. So when I first got Katie had a couple of the problems that Katie was dealing with when I first got her was you know, there were some mental struggles that she was dealing with. Some of them were because of the positions that she was in her vault. So it was my job to make sure that I put her in the right position so that the positions didn't dictate not wanting to hit the pole. So one of the things that happened with Katie was Katie's step was too far out and she was having to take these really long, reachy strides coming into the takeoff. The other thing that Katie, who has unfortunately not been able to get quite as far as I'd like, is her pole drop position to start the run and how quickly she lets the pole drop into the box. So she starts with it really low and the pole doesn't drop that much, which means at the mid mark, when you start running with the pole kind of at eye level, the weight of the pole is now on your body. And to counteract that, you have to start leaning backwards. Mm-hmm. So when I first started working with her, her pole drop was really low and she was too far out. So she's taking these super long strides and leaning back, trying to keep the pole carry weight as, you know, reasonable as she could. And I'm like, if you did that to me, I'm not going to want to hit the takeoff, right? That's like, that's like trying to go tackle somebody who's running at you by like leaning back to tackle them. Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're going to get bowled over.
Yep.
So a lot of the psychology that's kind of changed in Katie's jump has to do with the positions to then give her the courage to be able to go down and hit the pole. And then some of it is like, hey, every time we get to go up poles is promotion, and understanding the event in terms of, you know, the actual, the physics of it all, and understanding like at your body weight, at your velocity, this pole equals you're going to be such and such high in the air. And so getting her to understand like the non-emotional side of it, and then trying for the emotional side to put her in positions that yield an aggressive, you know, move forward. And those two kind of components have really helped her to understand like how to be confident and how to hit poles and not just hope that things go well when the, you know, contact against the back of the box is being made.
Gotcha.
You know, We use the phrase be mechanical, not emotional. But what's funny is I don't know if I'm speaking for Jake or our family, but we are pretty emotional in our coaching and in our vaults. We always have been. And as much as you want to keep it to mechanics, for instance, whenever I was pole vaulting, I had to tap into the emotions for certain movements in my vault. I was cut from a little bit different of a cloth with the shoulder situation, and there were certain aspects of my vault that I had to get so unbelievably amped up about to try to get myself into the appropriate positions. Whenever I was coaching at a high school in Illinois, I mean, I inherited 4 people who'd never pole vaulted before, and they didn't really have the mechanics down too well, no matter how many times we rinsed and repeated. But as soon as we turned in some emotional cues to it, hit the pole as hard as you can, drive it all the way to your top hand, turn, like really, really tapping into that emotional side, they started getting fired up. They started doing the movements. They started making bars. And then whenever you got a 15-year-old who's pumped up about making bars, the sky's the limit. So I totally get tapping into the emotions sometimes, for sure.
Yeah, it's would you, if you were to choose one, Brad, would you say that you were more of a technical or emotional vaulter?
Emotional, 100%.
Okay.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I felt like I had pretty decent technique. I mean, I looking at my jump, there are things obviously that we'd all change. I mean, I love the Tarasoff long leg swing and all that stuff, but I was just not that.
Right.
But the thing that I would say on, like the pole vault was a place. So when I grew up, there was things that I could do really well. Like for my size and weight, when I hit people in football, they were shocked. They were like, where did that come from? And I realized that like hitting something is like kind of part of me. And my strengths came from my nervous system more than my muscular system. So like the explosiveness was something that I could kind of lean on as kind of a trait of mine. So for me, it was like all of life's frustrations and things like that went into my takeoffs. And so it was very much fueled off of emotion. And one thing that I would say, as you guys are saying, like, mechanics, there's the mechanical side and the emotional side. And I'm not trying to pick apart what you said, because it's clearly like the fundamentals are super, 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 super important. But what I try to tell my crew is that we are not machines and we don't work well mechanically. And so what I try to do is talk about keeping energy in the system, as in like we're almost more ballerinas than we are, robotic. Yeah. And so if you're going to go try to swing a golf club, you can destroy yourself by thinking of individual positions when you realize that it's a fluid, connected motion. And so I try to get them to understand, like, we're trying to put energy in the system and keep energy in the system throughout the whole way. And what I've found, and this is just in my own experience, when somebody starts getting very mechanical and thinking of isolated movements, their brain can't keep up with the body. So when you go with an emotional cue and you've taught the fundamentals of timing properly, then the emotion still invokes the mechanical positions, but in a much more fluid, aggressive way. And that's kind of how I try to, coach some of the elites. And I think one of the faults of mine is that I probably rush that process, right? Where like more repetitions of mechanical movements would actually be good. And then we solidify that kind of foundation, and then we can bring the emotion into it. But I just kind of blow through those things because that's just kind of how I'm wired. And I'm like, let's get to the, dynamic aspect of it.
Yeah.
Go for it.
I think like when you get into a high intensity situation too, where, for your examples, you're jumping at the Olympics, you're jumping, for world championships on your third attempt, when you just knocked yourself out the day before, if you're just nitpicking on I don't see in your eyes you nitpicking on fine details, like every step down the runway, like I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this. It's correct. Like I would envision and think that you were thinking of maybe 2 or 3 broad cues that spanned, you know, a general area, and then the immense amount of repetitions that you've done previously show up, you know, just in that moment, because you're thinking of those broad cues. Like you know, one that we like is just simple: jump, push, finish. You know,
Yeah.
even just that, if you're spazzing out and you're like, I'm so nervous right now, I don't know what to do, jump, push, finish, man. You've done thousands of reps. They're going to show up. You know, that's kind of, you know, what we teach, and kind of how I would envision when I look at you run down the runway. I'm like, all right, I don't think he's nitpicking on every minor little detail.
No, you nail on the head. You hit the nail on the head. That's a 100% a correct breakdown or analysis of what I was thinking about when I was jumping. And then also, like, I think that's great to be able to instill that in the athletes you're working with, because I mean, that's how I see it. And I'll say this. I say this a lot to my athletes because they think of each individual step, right? And I'm like, when you run a 30-meter Excel, what are you doing? You're sprinting. Are you thinking about every step? No, you're trying to get to the line as quickly as possible. And guess what? You're as fast as you possibly can be. One of the things Dan Paff told me a long time ago that stood out, he said that when young children run, their mechanics are great. And I was like, that's an interesting comment. And I also remember working with high jumpers at WSU, and the majority of high jumpers can obviously jump high, which means a lot of them like basketball and they love dunking, right? So you put a ball in their hand and you watch the body naturally hit a penultimate flat foot strike, settling of the hips, rising up through the takeoff step, and a huge drive knee, right? You see all of this stuff and it's completely automatic. So the body wants to be in efficient positions. And as long as you don't get in the way of that process, and exactly what you said is cue jumping. I've never met somebody who, if they're jumping off one leg, doesn't have a drive knee, but I've met a ton of pole vaulters who don't have a drive knee, right? So you look at that and you're saying, well, dude, you're not jumping. What do you mean I'm not jumping? Look, it's like, no, your knee's not coming up. And that's a result of a biomechanical movement of like trying to jump. So you're actually not jumping at the takeoff. And so when one of the things that I realized as I was coaching, and even more so with the elites, but obviously with college and younger as well, is I didn't realize, I don't know if you guys find this way, like when I was younger, I thought that everybody had a mind and the human mind works in a particular pattern and way. And then as I get older, I'm like, oh my gosh, not like our minds are so different. Right. And I just kind of was naive to the idea that like maybe some of the ways that I think were helpful in my vaulting. And as I work with athletes, I realized that my job as a coach is to simplify their thoughts. It's never to make it more complex. Like if you're a coach who's actually making the jump more complex, you're doing more harm than good. And every athlete that I've found they're trying to do 1,000 things instead of 2 or 3 correct things. And so for me, it's like I have to pull all of these thoughts away from my athletes and give them one cue that sets up a multitude of movements that are in the proper positioning. Mm-hmm. And it's sometimes I want to slam my head against a wall because like they will have that conversation and then I'll ask what they were thinking about and they give me 13 items. And I was like, well, I wouldn't be able to jump if I was thinking about all that in the first place. Right. Totally. And it's like they can't get out of their own way sometimes and just understand what's important. And so, you know, for all you coaches out there, I mean, best of luck, right? There are certain minds that have the capabilities to simplify things and understand the important things. Then there are other minds that can't navigate through a lot of information very efficiently. And then when they try to do it all, it turns into paralysis by analysis.
Yeah, you know? Exactly. Yeah, no, that's it. I just had that talk with somebody last night.
Yeah.
That's what it is. And that's one really big thing that I think that coaches should try to do better is to just try and simplify it. It's a complex event, but it's also not that complex either. Like there's you can make it as complex as you want. And I come in contact, and I know you do, and Josh, I know you do, with coaches and athletes that approach me all the time, and they tell me this grandiose idea that they saw on YouTube last night. And it's like, I'm trying to think of a random one. Let's use the drive knee. My drive knee is terrible. My drive knee is terrible. Or I tuck a little bit at the top. I tuck a little bit, and I can't tuck. I can't tuck a little bit, because if I tuck a little bit, then I'm not going to jump really high. And I'm like, dude, you know how many people bend a little, maybe tuck a little bit or whatever.
Yeah.
I was like, your time would be better used thinking about some of these bigger, gigantic issues that you have rather than this little tiny thing that you're nitpicking about,
100%.
It's crazy. So there was another question here. Oh, this is a cool one. I like this one. I asked Katie this one.
Okay.
All right. You have to choose 3 exercises that outside of pole vaulting is its own separate entity in this question. Okay. So your athletes get to pole vault as many times as they want, but outside of that, for the rest of your athlete's career, they can only do 3 exercises. So are there 3 exercises that you could be like, all right, if I had to choose, what would they be?
It's funny. Sometimes when I work with Katie, you have to know Katie and you have to know her well to fully understand this probably. But a lot of time, there's a really funny story. She won't mind me sharing this. I remember very specifically, she came down, she was too close. And I said, Katie, you're a little close, move back 6 inches. And immediately she goes, how much do you want me to move back? I was blown away. I was like, I can't even believe this just happened. So here's the conversation. She's under, she runs through. Katie, move back 6 inches. How much do you want me to move back? I was like, what? Like, that doesn't even, this doesn't apply here. Like, I can't wrap my head around it. And I say that as jokingly because I'm like, I'm not sure how much she listens sometimes, and I'm not sure how much she's doing her own thing. But then when I actually told her this after I listened to her podcast, I was like, Katie, like, I'm really surprised you've heard a lot of what I've said over the years. Like, even though I don't think you're taking it in, you're actually listening to a lot of that stuff. And I say all of that because I'm pretty sure I agree 100% with what Katie said. So this isn't going to be anything mind-blowing. I would throw in an Olympic. For me, it would be a hang clean. I think hang cleans are great for pole vaulters.
Okay.
I would throw in a squat, and then I would throw in a sprint. And those I'm pretty sure that's what Katie said was
hang
clean.
Yeah, I think that's pretty much it. Yeah, just a simple sprint. Okay, so now we come to the point where it's like, okay, the elephant in the room is you did not mention anything for the upper body besides the hang clean, and the back squat is all core. You're working on these things, but somebody outside of this might say, well, you didn't do gymnastics, or you didn't do bench or pull-ups or anything, high bar.
Yeah. So what you're looking at, because we've allowed the pole vault to be a freebie, we know that we're going to get upper body strength by vaulting. The squat itself is the highest testosterone producing lift I think there is. You're looking at, especially as your squat starts getting higher, massive core stability, right? You're hitting all of the major primaries in the lower body, and you're getting a massive hormone boost when you do it. So now all of a sudden you're increasing testosterone production by doing this super heavy multi-joint exercise, which is completely solidifying your core, which is obviously going to be upper body. And then you're vaulting. So you're getting overhead stuff, you're getting lat activation and, pec stuff. And then you're also getting, through the hang clean, you're getting a lot of trap activation. Obviously you're getting bicep, grip strength. And so really the only thing that you're not getting in those is a push. But I'm not convinced that a push is, the absolute most important thing in the jump. So if you narrow it down to 3, I think you're getting more upper body than you think, but in a way that's super dynamic.
So just to make things interesting, I'm curious. So I did know, that there are studies that the back squat is the highest producing testosterone lift, of any of them. But up there also, they sometimes mention in conjunction with the squat is just a deadlift. So you chose the back squat and then the hang clean. So why choose the back squat over the deadlift? I'm just curious. Just because the back or the deadlift is a much more kind of posterior chain.
Well, you're also getting like that eccentric load in a squat, right? Where like a
Right.
deadlift, you're just concentrically standing up and then dropping the weight. So in the
Okay.
squat, you're going down, eccentrically loading. You're getting that conversion of power at the bottom to then come up. So you're getting a little bit more activation there.
Mm-hmm.
I would also say that while the squat can be a dangerous lift if you're in bad positions, done correctly, I think it may be a little bit safer than the same percentage of a deadlift. You know, if you get rounded in your back, and I'm going to have experience with this, you can rupture something pretty quickly.
Right.
But I think the biggest thing that I would say is the transition from down to up in the squat is better than just an up in the deadlift.
Okay, and then you would also have a lot of people say, well, you need to make sure that you know, they say ass to grass or what
Mm-hmm.
else? What are the other ones?
Yeah,
Something to heal or whatever.
yeah. There's a bunch of sayings.
So what if you're gonna do that back squat? Are you going? What is your range of motion in that
I'm gonna shoot for parallel.
parallel?
Yeah, I'm
Okay.
going to shoot for parallel. One of the part of the equation of testosterone production is time under tension. So if you're doing something like quarter squats, you're not under tension for nearly as long, and then also you're not activating some of those deep kind of posterior chain muscles as much. You're a little bit more quad dominant in like a half squat. There are then the other thing about a half squat or like a quarter squat, half squat is that you have to do a lot more weight to get that upper end benefit, which then the
Right.
risk reward starts going down a little bit or starts going up because you're risking a lot from like a spinal load of, you know, you got to put 500-600 pounds on the bar to really push yourself in like a quarter squat situation, where parallel is going to give you a safer spinal load, but then also better, you know, deep kind of glute and hamstring strength, that sort of thing.
Yeah, and I've known people that have really been super you know, dominant on that quarter squat, and you have to go super heavy on that. And I like it. It's a cool exercise, and I understand, you know, some people would say, well, you never go that far down when you sprint and
Mm-hmm.
things like that. But I've known maybe 3 people that I know of that have gotten injured just unracking or
Mm.
racking the quarter squat because of the enormous
Massive
load
load.
that they have to have on the bar in order to get the benefit from the quarter squat. So that would be, unless you have one of those Olympic racks or racks that kind of pull away, you know what ones I'm talking about, that
Yeah, the little
the
swivel.
Yeah,
the powerlifting ones that you just lift it up and then the rack kind of pulls away from it. Yeah,
Yep.
so that would be another thing too that you had mentioned with that, having to overload that much. I don't think the risk versus the reward is good on the quarter squat.
I agree. I agree. And you know, clearly with 3 exercises, you're going to be having some deficiencies in certain places, but I think bang for the buck, those are going to be your best ones and probably safest ones, so long as you have somebody teaching you the proper mechanics from the get-go.
Those
Right.
were basically all I did in college. If you
Yeah.
remember, Jake, I wasn't able to do any high bar. My shoulder would slip out. So I didn't do hang clean. I had the same 3. It was sprint, squat, and I tried to max out the squat. I tried to get as much out of that as possible. And then I was able to do bench. This movement did not
Mm-hmm.
bother my shoulder, but anything and above, which made pole vaulting a tiny bit difficult.
Yep.
I lived my career off 3 or 4 exercises. Made
You,
it work. Couple D3 championships.
there
Hell
we go,
yeah.
baby. Yeah,
Hell
buddy.
yeah.
Send it. You got any numbers, some PR numbers in the squat?
PR numbers, yeah. I don't know what my all-time squat record would be. I do remember doing like triples at 365, 375 for like triples. So I'd like to think that I could have done a single at 400.
Wow.
And then my max hang clean was 140K. So it's like 311-ish or something like that. And then bench was always my weakest of all the events, because I think I did have some shoulder issues as well. I wasn't very far behind in my incline compared to my bench, and most people have a big discrepancy there. So I think there's some functional weaknesses in my bench, but I got to like 250 in bench. But even a guy like Timmy Mack, he benched 300. So relative to like what I could do in the squat, what I could do in the cleans, my bench was significantly lagging. So those are for deadlift. I love hex bar deadlift. For those who are familiar, hex bar puts you in a much better position of alignment, that you're not over the bar, but you're inside the bar. So you can drive through your heels and not get out of position nearly as easily. And, that's easy to get your weights pretty high as well. So, 400s and stuff probably in there. Those are kind of my rough numbers. I kind of have a little bit of a benchmark of like, and this is just watching a lot of elite pole vaulters. And when I say elite, I'm saying probably, 550 and above. I would say that a pretty average strength level that I've seen, and clearly this isn't, don't bang your head against the wall if you can't hit these numbers and think that you can't, vault high, because I bet you Mondo and Renault can't hit these numbers, right? So right. I'm not trying to say this is what you have to be able to do, but I think 120K in cleans is probably kind of like a baseline of what somebody should be able to do at that kind of elite level. And then I would say, even just like a single rep max at 315 on the squat would be a number that I think would be pretty sufficient for that. And then I don't really necessarily have a bench, what you should be able to do in the bench, but 225 would obviously be something that I think a lot of elites would be able to hit.
Yeah. So that was like right about at so I was like 275 in the bench, which I don't know how I did that. And then,
nice.
And then squat was 315. And then you said 120K. I'm terrible with metric. What?
I got a calculator here. I think it's going to be like 284, but it might be like 264.
Doggone it, man. I got hammered on that one. I
was 122.2. Yeah, 264.
Dang it. Yeah, that was the only one I fell short of. It was I think I did like 255 or something like that, which not that far off. So those are pretty accurate,
I mean, you were 560, 555,
55, yeah.
55, right? You're right. So that's kind of where I'm thinking like, that's why I came up with those numbers is, I didn't really come up with them. I just kind of saw running averages of people who are about that high in the air. And these are kind of what their minimums, seem to be. And I would say that, if you're running about 9.2 to 9.3 meters a second and faster, it's probably that's kind of where your power output is going to be. And it's going to kind of go up from there for maybe some of the other guys. But the flip side is that you could be, have God-given speed, like let's say a Mondo,
right.
10,500 when he's not training for the 100 is moving pretty darn good.
Yeah.
His squat may be lower, but he has the kind of foundational strength. Like if he trained his squat a lot, I bet you his squat would be pretty darn high, because his power output to run a 10.5 is obviously really high, right? So just because he can't do it doesn't mean that he's not strong. It's just that he's put his, energetic training load in other places.
Right, for sure. So this is another thing that I've been dealing with a lot right now, and it's got to do with weather. So you grew up in not the greatest conditions in the springtime. Am I correct? Mm-hmm. Spokane. Yep. Okay. Definitely. So when does the season start? The outdoor season start? Is it March or April?
I think it was March. Yeah. March. Okay. Probably.
So it's roughly right around, we're in Chicago, so it's roughly around the same time. So I've been dealing with a lot of issues transitioning into the outdoor season. And this is the weekend of Drake. You're heading over to Drake, and Drake's kind of notorious for having just like kind of difficult conditions. It always seems like it's gray over there, and maybe sunny or maybe rainy and cold. Every time I've been to Drake, it's been rainy and cold and just difficult to jump in. But how do you transition your athletes from vaulting indoors to vaulting outdoors? And maybe how did you do that yourself? I heard a rumor, this is another true or false.
Mercury poisoning.
Yeah, here we go.
Here we go.
This is from the fish guy.
Okay.
No, I'm just joking. It's not from him. I heard a rumor that while you were vaulting in Washington, you didn't vault outdoors.
Yeah, that's not a rumor. Not a rumor.
Okay, so you just trained indoors all year.
Yeah, so UW actually, they have their own outdoor track facility now, but when I went there, this is another thing as we kind of talk to some of those younger vaulters, I didn't know that Pat was good. Pat was an unknown volunteer coach, so we didn't know that he knew it was going on or not. But when I first got there, there was no indoor facility actually. So my freshman year, we were vaulting at the concession level of Husky Stadium. So there were all these levels in the outdoor stadium, but there was concessions, and we had a quote unquote roof, but we didn't have any walls. So we were out away from the rain, but we were jumping in at the stadium, like by the concessions. And so we'd run up to the upper deck and we'd jump onto the pit, 20, 30 feet, doing whatever.
That's awesome.
And then that transitioned to a place called Sandpoint, which was an old Air Force base that had a bunch of hangars. And so we had a big diesel heater in there, and all the baseball players would come in and break all the windows as they're playing catch. And then it gets colder and colder as the season goes on. And then finally we got Dempsey indoor facility, and that's where I spent my last 2 years. So our training locations were terrible in college. We did have an outdoor track, but it was a track around Husky football stadium, but they hadn't resurfaced the track since I want to say 15 or 20 years. It was awful. And football was always practicing out there. So we couldn't just kick the football team off to have a vault session because the vault runway was on the straight. So it would have been right by the, sidelines. Mm-hmm. So we trained indoors all year in Dempsey, and we'd open up the big rollers and just try to let sunlight come in when we could. Fortunately for me, I was fairly successful in windy and rainy conditions throughout most of my career. And I think a lot of that was just getting on the runway, kind of like A to B. I don't care about anything. I'm going to hit this pole as hard as I can. And I was a bigger guy, so it was a little bit easier for me to run through wind. Mm-hmm. But it just didn't seem to really affect me that much when I transitioned outside, because it was I know what my job is, and everybody's dealing with the same conditions at any given time. So I remember thinking to myself, I was the kind of guy, I'm not detail oriented. I'm very macro. I'm very big picture. And what I say that is because we would show up to meets, and I would always, no matter what, I would put rain gear in my bag, and then I'd never look at conditions. People were like, dude, did you see the winds coming in today? I was like, no. Why does that matter? Well, you got to know where the wind's coming from. I'm like, we're all going to be there at the same time.
Right.
How does knowing where the wind's going to come from and then finding out where the wind's coming from at the moment you're on the runway differ? One of them is an anxious state of trying to control intangible, control things that you actually can't control. And the other is just I'm here, let's go make it happen, sort of thing. So it's, kind of just being dumb. Just I don't care. Is it going to rain? I'm not sure. So I'm going to put rain gear in my bag, because if it rains, I'm going to be ready for it. And if it rains, I'm going to beat all you because you guys suck. But you guys are watching the radar beat whenever the clouds are coming in. This is actually
totally true, though.
This is actually
what's up. That's the attitude, though.
No, I mean, it served me well. That's all I can say. But there's a funny story. I don't know I want to say it was it was either my sophomore or my junior year. We went down to Mount Sac, and hopefully most people know Mount San Antonio College down in Southern California. And back in the day when Mount Sac was rolling, it was one of the meets you wanted to go to, there was the college, the elite college or upper college. And then Sunday was the elite competition. And they had this little deal where if you won the college section, they would invite you to jump with the elites the next day. And so we show up, and it is hailing and snowing in Southern California at Mount Sac Relays, which I think is generally in April. It's either in April. Yeah, I think it's generally in April. It could be in May this year, but anyway. And we had 17 competitors in the college section. 15 competitors no-heighted.
Oh my goodness gracious.
One person cleared their opening height, and I cleared, 2 bars. And I was like, well, why am I going to keep jumping? I won. So I got to come back and jump the next day with Lojo. And that was post Sydney, he's reigning silver medalist. I'm like, holy crap, I get to jump with this dude.
Right.
But it was just a deal where it was I just thought it was hilarious. The conditions suck, guys, but 15 out of 17 people no-heighted.
That's not the greatest, right?
I'm
so I guess that brings me to a good point, though. So what I've been telling these athletes is obviously the mentality, because they train at my facility, and they train indoors, and it's a nice setup, and then they're going out on the weekends and they're like, coach, didn't go so well, and I can't go coach them at their track meets because there's rule infractions and things like that.
Yeah.
But they come back and I say, okay, well, what happened? And it's like, well, it was like 35 degrees and it was like 3 hours between my warm up and whenever I got to jump, and it was like dark out. And I was like, okay, so what did you grip and what pole did you use? Well, I just use the same one that, that we'll use at Rise, my facility. And I'm like, okay, that's the disconnect. So we have to make some sort of adjustments, like we have to, I'm sure well, and maybe you're that much of a savage that you don't have to make the adjustment. Hey, it's 25-mile-an-hour headwind. Brad Walker's ginsenging up and just boom. Hammering.
I love how the takeaway of this podcast is going to be, dude, I got to get some ginseng. Like ginseng's where it's at.
I've got it written and underlined right next to me.
Well, Panic's the ones that's going to get you going. The American stuff is good, but it's a little bit more mild.
Yeah, we need the good stuff.
There's kind of a funny there's a funny story, at least in my mind, and Tommy Skipper, who is a really good buddy of mine, will give a thumbs up on this story as well. So again, my mindset is run down there and hit the heck out of the pole, right? Mm-hmm. And by heck, it's a different word, but I'm just gonna say heck.
Absolutely.
And so I'm in Osaka, Japan, and I'm pretty sure it was after I won Worlds in Osaka. And for those people, for the people who don't know the elite scene as well, especially if you're coming off of like a major world championship or an Olympic championship, it's less now, but there was very big appearance money at a lot of these meets. Now, Sergey Bubka did a really poor disservice to the pole vault community because Sergey would get something like $50,000 or $100,000 appearance fee to show up at a meet. And then if he decided it wasn't a good day to jump, he'd run through 3 times and take $100,000 from the meet director. Ooh. And the meet director started getting really mad about that. So what happened was, if you no-heighted, you would get half of your appearance. Okay. So, but in shot put or in the sprints, if you false start, they don't deduct. And if you foul 3 times in the shot put, you still get full appearance. It's only for the pole vault. And it was only because Bubka would take massive appearances, run through 3 times, wave to the crowd and leave. So the pole vault got screwed because of Bubka's decisions back in the day. Wow. So anyway, we're at this meet in Japan, and I had a pretty good appearance fee. And then there was good prize money. And it was awful. I mean, it was terrible. It was to the point where I knew it was dangerous to pole vault, but I also knew that there was a big appearance and a big prize on the line. And, most of the time I just didn't think about competing for money. I thought about, can I jump as high as possible today? But then there are some meets where you're like, this isn't a PR day. We're here to take the victory and make it to the next meet, sort of thing. And so Tommy, a lot of the competitors were freaking out, and kind of rightfully so, because it was one of the most dangerous pole vaulting jump days I had ever had. And Tommy looked at me, and again, we were good buds. And he goes, dude, what are you going to do? And I said, well, do you mind if I borrow a couple of your poles? And he was like, you can do whatever you want. I don't care. So I borrowed one of his poles, and he goes, but like, this is too small. And he goes, what are you going to do? And I said, I'm going to run down there and not hit the heck out of it. And he just like looked at me like kind of funny, and then started laughing. But it was basically me saying, I'm going to get off the gas. I'm going to be on a small pole, and I'm going to go into a bit of a field jump instead of like a powerful jump to get over the bar and collect a paycheck and make it to the next meet. And what I do with my athletes is, I know that Katie actually got into this. We jump with our standards pretty deep, and we have a pretty consistent, this is how we warm up. And we always want to start on a small pole to build confidence, to warm the body up, and then make sure that we're moving up poles from there. So I think any athlete should have in their bag a smaller pole than they're accustomed to jumping on for that crazy cold day with a headwind. And you just start on something a little bit smaller, and then you try to blow through it. If you can, you get to go up to the next one. If you can't, that's your pole for the day. And that's kind of how we deal with it.
You do any grip adjustments or a little less grip or?
Sure. Yeah. I mean,
maybe.
I think you guys know this well, that you coach different athletes differently. Right. Yeah. So it's like, you're going to have maybe a monster who is not affected by it, and you're probably not going to change his grip, but you maybe have him on one pole smaller. And then you're going to have somebody who knows that gripping down is safer and better, and they're going to love that idea. So then they get confidence in knowing that they have a lower grip than average. So I think it probably happens on a individual basis, but I would say I use grip a lot. Like I actually, like I said, when I'm not a big detail guy, I don't know where Katie's gripping, to be honest. I know where Katie grips on any given pole, and I make adjustments above or below what her normal grip would be. So we change grip a lot in the meets, but we don't measure it because it's like it's a ballpark. You know,
And you
I mean?
know what it looks like. You know what her jump looks like, and you know how that pole's supposed to roll through.
Yep.
And you know that it's like, okay, you know, if you're a good coach, you understand it's not the number. I don't care. Like that's why we don't label our poles really at Rise. We just are like, hey, you know, if I tell you to move up 2 fingers of grip, then just move up 2 fingers of grip. Well, I don't know how high that is. I don't care how high that is. It
exactly.
doesn't matter how high that is. That pole is going to work better where I'm telling you to grip, you know?
Yep.
And it's funny that you said that because Josh, remember last night we were at a session and I told a girl, I was like, all right, so this is going to sound crazy, but she's got a pole constraint at her high school. Her high school doesn't have very many poles. She's like, this is what I have. And I was like, okay, well, I've got you on a 1.5 foot longer pole right now than what you are going to be able to jump on this weekend. So we got to figure out just how to make something work. So we're going to drop you down to a little bit shorter approach. I'm going to drop your grip to tighten it up, tighten that pull up a little bit. And then I want you to just not go as hard. and she was like,
it's probably hard. It's hard
what?
for you to say that. You're like, I don't even want to say this, but you have to.
Yeah. And I told her specifically, it takes a very good athlete, not just a pole vaulter, because we know those mechanical pole vaulters who are maybe not very good athletes, overall athletes, that maybe you tell them to not do something at 100%. It's like, I only know how to do it that way. And I told her it takes a good athlete to be able to run down and be like, all right, I'm going to back off a little bit right here, right here, right here. And all right, we're over. And that shows that, you know, you as an athlete were probably pretty well-rounded. To me personally, it would, because you tell some people that and their mind just spins and like, I don't know how to do that. What do you mean don't go hard? What are you talking about? And I think that in tough conditions, whenever you have to do what you were talking about with Tommy, where it's like, I'm going to have to jump on this pole that's a little bit small, that's whenever the real good, solid athletes, I think, kind of figure out a way. They just figure out a way to navigate through the competition and get to the next day, you know, and that's special. And that is really hard to teach. It's so hard to teach that.
You know, I think 100% agree with you 100%. I think that if I look at, let's say Mondo and Renault and I would say Casey Lightfoot is definitely in this group of people. There's a trend towards, I've always thought this, that feel athletes have the ability to kind of take it to that top level. And I think because of, and there's probably a multitude of reasons why, you know, some of these guys can take marathon jump sessions, right? They're light, they're not on as big of poles relative to, you know, or not even relative, just like they're not getting beat up by the stiffness of the pole as much. And that creates a feel that is, you can't coach that. You can't coach feel into somebody. You can coach positions into somebody, and then they have to take that input in information and their body has to create feel with it. And I recruited Casey Lightfoot because I watched his videos. So like he's a special kid. He's got some feel. I remember I recruited Tate Curran, Anthony Curran's son, over at UCLA. And I remember talking to Anthony. I go, hey, where's your son going? He goes, dude, nobody's recruiting him. They just assume he's going to UCLA. I was like, let's bring him up. And then he went to UCLA. But but he has really good feel. And I mean, Anthony had good feel, so it runs the family. I'm sure that, you know, that Greg Duplantis would have had great feel in the vault, and his son does, and obviously Renault. So I think that, you know, I agree. It's those guys all have more feel than I did, but I could feel the jump enough and understood my strengths and weaknesses to kind of navigate, you know, good positions and that sort of thing. But I think feel is one of those X factor intangibles that the brain has to. Your proprioceptive ability is like kind of God given. You can make it a little bit better, you can make it a little bit worse, but it's like the ability for you to feel the event. You know, is something special. Obviously, Sam can feel the event. He feels it in a different way.
Yeah,
but
for sure.
The tension and things that he does and the speed of his jump is obviously a phenomenal attribute to his ability to kind of feel what's going on. And so yeah, huge component to success.
Yeah, for sure. That is that another thing that can contribute to that, to developing that, is really hard, but tens of thousands of reps.
That's it.
You know,
That's it.
I mean,
yeah.
If you don't have that proprioceptive thing that we were talking about, the hard part is you're going to have to put in a lot of reps. And then after, that many reps, years and years of doing something, then you'll start to develop that real good feel. But we all have probably coached vaulters that they show up the first day and you're like, whoa, okay, you kind of got a little something going on here, and they kind of off the bat just have a little bit of feel, and then you just hope that they continue to develop, from that point on. But
and not to pick on my decathlete brethren, but it's kind of funny that the majority of pole vault coaches or kind of trained pole vault athletes, when you watch a decathlete jump, you're like, he's a decathlete.
Yeah.
Right. And generally, and this is a stereotype, not everybody falls in this category. I don't want all the decathletes to get mad or anything. I don't know if any decathletes would be listening to this, but decathletes generally are a little bit more blocky movers, right? Very strong, very powerful, but their proprioceptive ability in general, I mean, maybe a guy like Ashton would be different, maybe an outlier. But I think, and part of it is, as you said, they're not taking the tens of thousands of jumps that a pole vaulter is. But it seems as though they have a little bit more of trouble finding the feel of the jump, considering that they have taken quite a few jumps, and you can kind of still see the movements seem a little bit different than a pole vaulter. Right. I just think that's an interesting kind of anomaly within that group. And, there's a lot that goes into that statement, as in majority of decathlon coaches were decathletes, so they weren't pole vaulters, so they don't coach like a pole vault coach would. There's a bunch of little things. I just think it's funny that with a talented guy who can run a 10-3, 10-4, 10-500, go long jump 26 feet any day of the week, they can't easily flop over a 50. It's like,
right.
Come on,
yeah,
guys,
that is kind of crazy if you think about it. That brings me, you said you're good friends with Tommy. Was he a decathlete?
The decathletes were happy that Tommy was not a decathlete.
Because he could chuck a javelin, couldn't he?
Tommy was, Tommy's an insane athlete. It was fun training with Tommy because he could beat me in almost everything that we did. There's a bunch of funny Tommy stories. Like, he was put on, I won't get into the full story, but he was put on a full football scholarship because a random football coach watched him punt a football and was like, will you kick for us? And then there was another story where Tommy was throwing a baseball with a buddy. A baseball guy saw him, said, will you train and come to major league tryouts? He went to the tryouts and got drafted in like the 60 something round.
What?
But like had never played a game of baseball in his life. Like he was so physically gifted. So in one of the years, his coach asked him to do decathlon at the Pac-10s. It was Pac-10s in this time. And his coach gave him 2 weeks to train for the decathlon. And he only gave him 3 attempts per event. So like 3 times throwing the shot put, but it was like the first time had to be a safety throw. And then he could get to try twice instead of like all 6 throws or, 5, 6 throws. I think it's 6 throws. And he won the Pac-10 in the decathlon by a significant margin, not even using all the attempts and all the events, training for the event for 2 weeks, and scored like, I don't know, 7,000 something. I think it was like high 7s, maybe mid 7s. But like, he was a freak, man.
Holy cow.
That's next level.
Oh, he's a freak.
That's wild.
He's got freaky abilities.
We got to see him jump. There was one time, unless I'm mistaken, wasn't he at him and Russ Bowler were like battling it out? Maybe Toby was there at a USA championship. Maybe it was in Indiana.
Yeah, Indianapolis. Actually, Russ won. It was 2006, I think.
It was
I was there.
580, I think, was the winning bar, maybe.
Tommy, myself, and I want to say like Hartwig tied for bronze. I think, for 3rd place.
Yeah.
It was it was funny. There's always an off year of a championship, right? Where there's no championship, and they'd have like a money meet. And I never won nationals in a non-championship year. Like so I never got to go to the big money meet. But I remember the official came up to us and said, "You three tied," and they coin flipped to to find out who got what medal. Even though we all had third place, they had a third, fourth, and fifth. They didn't have three third places.
Right.
And I'm pretty sure I got third. I think Hartwig got like the fourth place medal, and Tommy got the fifth place medal. And Tommy took the fifth place medal, and he walked off the track and threw it in the garbage can, and then went
no. I mean, on a coin flip.
On a coin flip,
man.
yeah,
That's
it was
crazy.
It was funny, but
That's
Tommy and I stay in contact all the time. He's still a really good friend. We love woodworking, and we hope to one day build like massive tables out of huge slabs and do all sorts of fun metal work and stuff like that. But he's,
that's a theme with, I'm noticing, I actually mentioned it to Jake. I know that Hollis does some woodworking as well. And Jack Witt also does some woodworking as well. And I'm like, man, as I was going to ask you earlier, like this post pole vault mindset where you're still getting some of that itch with the coaching, but are you feeling like there's some creativity, there's some the mental piece where it's like you like to be, you like to do stuff with your hands? Like, why is it that there's this theme in the pole vault world where we've got a bunch of people woodworking?
Yeah, like we're both running ultra marathons now, which is obnoxious. It's like once you're done, it's like there needs to be some fix or something like that you're pursuing, or I don't know.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think that the majority, I mean, look, you can, for the most part, like if you just put a camera on a pole vault competition, you're going to see a bunch of dudes who pretty much look the same. Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. A couple are going to be taller, a couple will be shorter, but I think that I think that we're all kind of cut from a similar cloth. Like it takes a certain mind to want to risk personal injury in an event that's really stressful, that causes you to push yourself in a way that most events don't. That kind of a certain mind finds itself there. Mm-hmm. Right. So my guess is that there's that certain mind likes challenges and is creative. There's probably just attributes that the common pole vaulters share. And I think that there's something to just about being like, again, I'm not PC, right? I don't think that there's toxic masculinity in the world. I think that there's masculine men who enjoy masculine tasks, right? So like, give me a chainsaw, send me out to the woods, tell me to take down a massive tree. And I'm like, yes, this Saturday is going to be awesome.
Yeah.
Right. And so I think that at least in my mind, there is something kind of even meditative and masculine and fun about taking just this solid, dense piece of wood and turning it into something in a creative way. There's like a artistic, kind of beauty to a masculine activity that to me is just, it's neat. It's like, I like to create something out of like masculine materials, but I wouldn't really be a good like clothing designer. Like I don't want to use like threads and yarn and build something to drape over somebody. Like I want like hard, big, strong, bulky things. Like Tommy made this, I helped a little bit on the project, but we made this table that was like 500 pounds with I-beams and like a 2-inch thick 8/4 piece of fir, I think was the wood that we ended up using just because it's what he had. And, and we're just geeking out over it, just broing out, like crack a beer, let's grab the router and let's just, do big fun things. Right.
I love it. That sounds like me and Jake every time I go back to Plainfield, Illinois. It's like, all right, hey, we're going to build a deck this weekend. It's like, all right, let's do it. Get the saws and drills out. Let's let it rip.
And and it's like, but the flip side to that, and it's just, kind of maybe the cloth that we're cut from is like, people who wouldn't enjoy that side of things probably wouldn't enjoy putting their life in a bunch of risk unnecessarily, and there's nothing wrong with either side of it. Right. It's just like, if you don't like taking risks, you may not like chainsaws, and it's not good, bad, or whatever. It's just, I think that there's part of that. Yeah,
it's funny. I just got back from Colorado. I told you I renovated that camper van, and took my daughters and my wife out to Colorado, and we love traveling around the mountains. And so I contacted Pat Manson out there, and nice. I was like, hey, we're coming out there. What's some cool stuff we could do? I got the family with me, and he's like, oh yeah, you can do this. And then like one of the days you could call me and we could like climb a 14,000 foot mountain. And I was like, We could do that.
I got children. Pat, I got children and they're young.
And I was like, okay, yeah, he's cut from that too. All right.
Yep.
That's
speaking of
cool.
Pat Manson, I went out and vaulted in one of my very few, I had like 2 or 3 elite meets, and I ended up getting paid on this one. It was the Pueblo Street Vault. And I was staying with Sam Pearson, and he's good buddies with Pat Manson, and they run, a vault club out there in the back of a church, and it's just beautiful with the mountains in the background.
Cool.
And everyone's like, hey, let's go back to this house and hang out. I'm like, all right, what are we going to do? And they're like, well, we'll just figure it out. And Pat Manson rolls up on a quad, and he's just like, hey, go grab the shotgun. We're going to go dove hunting.
Nice.
And I'm like, dude, I met you like 2 minutes ago. And he's just like, no, just trust me. Just hop on this thing.
Let's go.
Yeah.
Grab it. And we'll figure it out. And we ended up, and I'm like connecting the dots. I'm like, this is that dude who was really good in high school. And my dad had mentioned his name a couple times. And like, I'm out here shooting doves off the back of a 4-wheeler with him. And then we went back and it was like, okay, what do we do now? And they were like, well, we eat them. So we prepped them, we ate them, and then we ended up all vaulting at that street vault. But you're 100% right. There's this just like want to mentality in people where it's just like, of course we're going to go do this. Why wouldn't we go and do that? You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. If the option's there, we're going to do it. We're going to do it. I mean, you got adrenaline junkies, right? And you just got this mindset of like, what's interesting, it popped into my head as you guys were talking about this, is that as a coach, I started to pick up on this as a competitor, and I see it more and more as a coach. It's funny because our personalities are shown in our vault. Mm-hmm. Like, what I mean by that is I don't know. I think this is a trait a lot of us could probably see, maybe IQ on it a little bit more, but like a person's commitment level, the way they hit the pole, the way that they get through the jump is their personality in like physical form.
That's deep.
And it's like, really deep. I remember seeing people like Pat Manson hit such a beautiful jump, a very clean jump, right? Mm-hmm. I imagine, and I know Pat a bit, and so I feel comfortable even saying this, but I imagine that Pat has a very smooth thought process. Yeah. Right. And a very clear understanding of things that he's doing and why he's doing them. And then I see, somebody else with maybe a more of a dynamic rushed jump. And I'm like, okay, I think I'm starting to get how your mind works. And then I can see a guy like, a Bjorn Otto, very muscular, very strong, afraid to grip high. Okay, you got some fears you're navigating through. Mm-hmm. And then you got some guys, I'm not going to name names because people will be like, oh, but like there's another guy who's super physically talented, but wouldn't pull the trigger on a swing early enough in his jump to have a clean top end. So wants to hang on the bottom too long because he's scared to get upside down early and not willing to risk, to find these better positions. And so I just find that an interesting component to our event where it's like, you see the personality in their jump, and it's just an interesting kind of characteristic or quality of our event.
That's exactly right. Next level deep on it.
I didn't know you were this deep. This
beneath layers I've gone before in the full.
Well, that's exactly right. Exactly what you said right there is exactly, you nailed it, because I have talked to you, in passing one time when I was 18 years old, and I've only watched you pole vault. And I could have predicted this podcast. Like I legitimately could have, just by watching you run down the runway, hit the pole, finish your jump. That's a really, really cool thing. And now I'm just going to totally just analyze people's vaults.
Yeah, for sure. And you're going to find that X factor in some of the young kids that you're looking for. And you're going to start understanding like, oh, this kid's he's not afraid. Like I can move him up poles earlier, or I can ask him to do things that maybe some of these other kids can't handle. And so I see that in my own elites. And it's probably there's a lot of things that when I work with my elites that like, I know that they don't know about themselves, Mm-hmm. So there's a little bit of an intimacy in terms of like understanding their personalities in ways that it may not even be as beneficial as you'd like it to be to even share that, knowledge with them. Yeah. But you get to kind of understand that and then understand where you can push them and where you can't, what you can get out of them, what you can't, those sorts of things. That I think is a really, they say it's like the art of coaching, you know what I mean? And it's like, by no means there's a lot of shortcomings that I have as a coach. I'm not a great motivator because I was self-motivated. So I'm like, I'm not going to be a cheerleader on the runway. Like, I'm going to give you straight facts. And sometimes it's not going to feel good when you hear something you don't like. But if you want to hear something that you like, if you're doing something wrong, like, I'm not the right coach for you. You know what I mean? And so I probably don't navigate that as well as I could, especially coaching women. And that's not a knock on, it's just the emotional side of that can sometimes, like, I think I could be a better motivator is basically what I'm trying to get at. But that's not kind of how my mind works. So I can't be inauthentic. You know what I mean? Like when I'm coaching.
I get very direct, which is why I honestly I struggled a bit with coaching high school. I scare the heck out of some of my vaulters sometimes because I get very emotional. I'm really, assertive in the way I communicate things. And some vaulters, I had one specifically who vibed so well with that. And he was an all-state guy in a couple years. It was like no problem. And then there was a couple others. And, having a teaching background, I probably should have adapted my teaching a little bit. And they weren't able to survive as well. And I learned from that. And I think you grow as a coach in that. One question I had though, that we asked Jeff Hartwig whenever he was on, that is a repeat question that I keep getting on Instagram.
Okay.
And I don't know, it's a loaded question, right?
Okay.
It is, what advice do you have for the college level vaulter who's jumped, 535, 540, 550, 555, whatever it is? They're right on that, like, I think I can, side of things.
Yep.
What advice do you have for the college vaulter who's trying to break into elite, AKA, Luke is obviously a great example. He's jumped 560.
Nice.
He's trying to hang on and do his thing and be a part of, a championship series someday.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think there's a little bit of a no man's land that's hard to navigate, and when you're in that land, it's like, do I move on with my life? Do I hang on to this? I've never been a supporter of the pole vault bums, which is the same as a beach bum or a surf bum, where it's like, and why I say that is not because if they're getting enjoyment, that's great. But it's like, I've seen a lot of people who hit pause on life for longer than they should to like continue to chase a dream that doesn't seem to be coming as quickly as they would like. And so that's not for me to judge, whoever's sticking around in the, event for a long time or short amount of time. It's just, I feel a little bit sometimes like, it's time for you to do something else. But when it comes to that college athlete who's looking to make those transitions, my advice, which may or may not be worth consideration, would be, I feel as though the pole vault community loves the pole vault so much that they want to pole vault all the time. And they think that their biggest improvements are coming on the pole, when in my opinion, the biggest improvements are coming off of the pole vault runway. And so I tell this to any high school kid who asks how to jump higher, or any college, really anybody. As I said, you have to become a better athlete first and then become a better pole vaulter. And if you understand just you kind of distilled the vault down to the very basics. And I do see things in equations. So like, I look at it as a very linear thing. If we know that year after year, the fastest pole vaulters in the world jump the highest, then we can't overlook speed development. And so then we look at speed and we say, well, what's speed? Well, it's a component of, stride lengths and stride frequency. So if you're looking at, well, your nervous system has to get faster to increase your frequency, and or your stride length will be increased by power output, we have to increase power. So it's kind of up to you to decide how you're going to increase power and how you're going to increase kind of that frequency. For me, it's going to be, I like the idea of breaking down muscle fibers, building up stronger muscles, and then teaching the athlete to put more force into the track when they sprint. But there are other sides of people who would say plyometrics and additional sprint training is a better way to build up an athlete for speed. But you just can't get around that component. And I think, I'm not sure if it was Coover's podcast or Hartwig's, but it might have been it was Hartwig's, because you guys were talking about maybe not being the fastest, right? And you guys cued in on something super important early. If you're not running as fast as it takes to jump a certain bar, like, you're not going to find it in these like little hidden compartments within the pole. Like, they're not there. And
Yep.
so if you're not increasing your speed to, let's say, a 9.3 or a 9.4 or whatever, you don't have the kind of initial amount of energy you need to roll a big enough pole over to get your body X amount in the air. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah. So I guess the way that I would look at it is to say, I try to tell my athletes, like, I'm an emotional person and very passionate about certain topics. But as a coach, I try to be very logical and pull the emotion out of it. And I try to get my athletes to see it without their emotion clouding their judgment. So like if the advice was to Luke, it would be like, don't worry about if you make it or when you make it. Look at the foundational components that you need to change to give yourself a shot to make it. Address those first. And then if you have the meters per second on the runway you need and get on a big enough pole, you now have a chance to actually do what you want to do. But sometimes the emotion overrides that logic, and then you get lost in like this, should I quit? Should I not quit? It's like, well, don't worry about that. Let's look at the actual important foundational components. And if you can't get to a 9.3 meters a second, if you're stuck at an 8.9, that's going to be an easier decision to make, to know when to hang it up.
Totally.
That's actually a really good point. Just kind of break it down and be very objective with it, and just be like, hey, if I'm not running, and maybe this is not what you're saying, but let's say 3 years out of college, if I'm not running in the nines, I don't know, like,
tough road.
Just not, I mean, and especially as you get older too, because as you get older, it's probably more difficult to go from that like 8.9 to 9.3 when you're creeping up towards 30 or something, because some of these pole vault bums that you're talking about, I mean, these guys are, they're taking
35, 36, 37,
chasing
and
and I'm like, man, and that's the other thing too, is you also have to look at your life. You have to look at your life. And that's what I had to do. I was like, you know what? I want to marry this woman. I want to have kids with this woman. I want to have a house.
Yeah.
I want to, have a job. I want to contribute to society and all of these things. And that was, for me, that was where it was like, and I was running 9.2 for a long time and still not kind of breaking through and being able to do what I needed to do. And then it was just like, you know what? It is what it is, man.
maybe it's just the hand you were dealt, but it's like, but I do think that's at least how my mind works, is that you look at the objective components, right? And then you say you can quantify it, and then it helps the emotions. Because we're an Olympic year, and we're in a year that's very weird, right? With a lack of meets, and people can't get into meets, and you're doing all this random stuff, and I'm seeing the emotions start to boil over, and even the athletes that I'm working with. And so it's kind of like my job to kind of say, hey, this is what I see from a non-emotional place, because you're in the middle of an ocean that's like throwing waves over your head as you're trying to like keep your head above water and navigate this really stressful period of time. And I get to see these very like real components to what's going on. And so I try to give them the non-biased or non-emotional side of it, so that they can take a rational approach to then understand what their emotions and where they're being tricked, from their emotional standpoint.
Sure.
And I don't know if it works. I mean, I have this little saying where like, you can't solve irrational thoughts with like with rational thoughts, right? Like, because they're irrational, so they don't make sense in the first place. But I do feel like if you give somebody a rational, logical approach to understanding a certain topic, they may be able to kind of corral their, thoughts that are pulling them in all directions, and be a little bit more focused on what that looks like.
Totally.
Well, I don't know if I could quantify the amount of knowledge that you just dropped on so many people that's going to help so many people with this podcast. I think that's a good, we've almost done. I mean, you said Rogan does like 3 hours.
We're pretty much
at
there.
like 240 something. That's crazy. But we just couldn't stop. It's too cool of an experience to be able to talk to you, and you're full of more knowledge than I had even anticipated. So it's just we really appreciate it. And is there any like places that you would want people to follow you, or that, things like that, or?
I pretty much dropped off all social media back in the day.
Yeah.
I realized that, again, I'm a very conservative person. I'm a Christian. There are a lot of things that fire me up, and, being in those kind of circles and reading all these things, I just end up getting myself in trouble with some of the comments that I probably say anyway. So I dropped off all that stuff a long time ago. The only thing that I did do is jump on Instagram to put a couple little woodworking pieces up the other day, but I'm not really trying to build a big following. So I appreciate the opportunity to get my name out there. But yeah, I'm just kind of flying under the radar, trying to live life as it was in the 2000s.
Yeah, well, I appreciate it. We appreciate it. And this is a One More Jump podcast. Thanks again, Brad. Appreciate it.
Thanks, guys. Pleasure being on here. Thanks for the time.
All right, that's a wrap. Awesome.
Cool.
Hey, dude, I can't even.
I just kind of sat there and was
so
just like,
much.
Holy cow.
I know. I didn't
Why
realize.
are you not writing a book, man?
Straight up.
Do you have a book?